Chapter 1086. Chanyu walked out of the golden tent and looked around. A satisfied smile appeared on his dark and handsome face. He was satisfied with the calmness of his subordinates, and even more satisfied with what he had built for so many days and years. In his opinion, the northern battlefront army, which was seriously short of cavalrymen, was no match for the cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe. The battle between the two sides had been in a stalemate a few days ago. On the one hand, the northern battlefront army was unexpectedly tough. On the other hand, the Tang armaments and cultivators were beyond imagination. On the other hand, the cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe did not go all out. In a battle between infantry and cavalry, no matter who had the innate advantage, the cavalry was psychologically superior. If infantry wanted to resist the cavalry, they would have to pay more in physical and mental strength. A few days ago, the cavalry of the Golden Tribe was exhausting the Tang infantry's physical and mental strength. More importantly, they were gradually wearing down the enemy's will and courage. At the same time, they were boosting their morale and confidence of winning. Today was the day of the final battle. The cavalry of the Golden Tribe would attack with all their strength. They would attack without reserve. They would attack without leaving any survivors. They would return the humiliation they had suffered for hundreds of years to the Tangs. They would completely defeat the main force of the northern battlefront army. It was a risky strategy, but in Chanyu's eyes, it was a sure-win strategy. After testing the enemy a few days ago, he was sure that the Tangs did not have any hidden tricks. So, he would crush them head-on. Dawn was coming. The white light from the east covered 1/10 of the sky. The warm morning light fell on the grassland and on Chanyu's face, making his cheeks look stronger. He looked at the grassland in the south and the Tang camp in the distance. He seemed to see the cavalry of the Golden Tribe surging like a tide, and the ground of the grassland starting to shake. Then, just like a few days ago, the Tang camp would launch all kinds of armaments. The catapults would make a dull sound. The spears in front of the camp fences would be sharp. The iron thorns in the trenches would be cold. The swords of the cultivators from the central plains would shine. The chi of heaven and earth would change violently. However, those would be drowned by his cavalry. General Buell walked over. He looked at the wisest Chanyu in the history of the grassland, and the man he admired the most. He said in a trembling voice, "From today on, you will be the king of the world." The chief no longer smiled, remaining calm as usual. It was because he was certain that he could remain this calm. He looked past the Tang camp in the south, and at a location further south. According to the imperial advisor, that was Chang'an. That gentle but fearsome emperor had died 6 years ago, but his daughter was still alive. Chanyu thought to himself that he would kill her after conquering Chang, and then stab his penis into her body. Ada also appeared outside the golden tent. He did not take a bath last night, and the blood stains on his body had already coagulated, giving off a faint stench which attracted the mosquitoes and flies in the weeds. The nobles looked at the former slave, who was now the most powerful warrior of the Golden Tribe. Their eyes were full of hatred and fear, and they did not want to stand too close to him. Ada was injured on the battlefield a few days ago. In order to remember this injury, he purposely did not wash off the blood on his body. It was not because he wanted to remember the humiliation, but because he wanted to remember that he should learn from the opponent. That day, he hid among the cavalry of the Golden Tribe and broke through the trenches and spear fences of the Tang army. Then he hid in the dead bodies of his companions and tried to assassinate Hua Ying, the vanguard general of the northern battlefront army. Ada had always wanted to kill Hua Ying. At first, he only wanted to take revenge on Ning Ke for the bloody captive slaughter in Chang'an. But later, he was not reconciled to the fact that he failed to kill Hua Ying. The unreconciled feeling was like a poisonous snake that made him take the risk to assassinate Hua Ying. His assassination failed because from the very beginning, or more precisely, from the moment he hid among the cavalry and rushed to the front of the Tang camp, his whereabouts and purpose had been clearly predicted by someone. Hua Ying did not show up. What came was an iron hammer and a tactical array. Ada was ambushed and was immediately injured. But he was after all one of the most powerful cultivators in the Golden Tribe royal court. He finally broke through the encirclement of the Tang army and escaped back to the Golden Tribe. But he was extremely embarrassed. Regardless of his injury, he visited the nation master late at night and learned who those people were. The one who saw through his plan was Fan Yu, the fourth of the academy. The warrior who waved the iron hammer was Mr. Six of the academy. And the woman who used the tactical array, as if it was alive, was Mr. Seven of the academy. The three masters of the academy were all at the peak of the see-through state. In the world of cultivation they were certainly great figures, but for a truly powerful cultivator like Ada, he could easily defeat 10 of them at once. But he still failed miserably, which he could not understand. After thinking for a whole night, Ada did not become angrier or dizzy with anger. Instead, he became much calmer. This was the first time he fought with the academy on the battlefield, and he learned a lot. He respected the academy a lot more, and was more determined to destroy the academy. That was why he was so calm when he looked at the Tang camp under the morning light. Even though he was hated and feared by those nobles, he was still calm. The Golden Tribe would definitely win today, and he did not need to do anything. They also believed that the Golden Tribe would win, so Chan Yu and Ada were calm. But more men from the grassland were fanatical. They looked at the Tang army in the south with cold eyes like wolves. As long as they defeated the Tang Empire, the Golden Tribe royal court would be the overlord of the world. In the New World, they would occupy the most prosperous town in the Central Plains, where the smoothest silk, have the most beautiful women, drink the strongest wine, drink the clearest stream, and eat the softest bread. These were all gifts from the everlasting heaven. If they did not accept them, they would be punished by heaven. Chan Yu, Ada, and countless cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe were looking at the Tang camp in the south. In the Tang camp, General Hua Ying and his subordinates were also looking at the north. In the temporary general's mansion, Su Qi was also looking at the north. He was looking at the hungry wolves in the morning light and the morning wind. People sensed the danger. The war in the previous 10 days had been extremely fierce. The cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe did try their best, but the Northern Battlefront Army's defense was extremely tough. That was why they were evenly matched. But today was different. It was obvious that the Golden Tribe was going all out today. Chan Yu and his subjects were ready to bet the fate of the entire tribe on the battle that was about to begin. Hua Ying's face turned pale. With the help of the telescope, he could see everything happening in the Golden Tribe royal court. He saw the grassland barbarians feeding the horses with food, water, and salt. He even saw the lamb bones in the pot. As an experienced general of the Tang army, he knew the habits of the grassland cavalrymen. In 2 hours at most, the well-fed warhorses would lead the wolf-like barbarians to him. That was the most regular rule of fighting for the grassland cavalrymen. That was also why he was so angry. Chan Yu and his grassland cavalrymen were not afraid to let the Tang army see what they were doing. That meant they had already set the time of the battle and informed the Tang army. What kind of confidence was that? And what kind of humiliation was that for the Tang army? If it were 10 years ago, Hua Ying would have sent his cavalrymen to attack as soon as he saw the first scene. He would have been able to win the battle when the enemy was unprepared. But he could not do that now. He did not have enough cavalrymen, nor could he prepare the warhorses in batches like the Northern Battlefront Army did when they were in their prime. If that sentence and that judgment came to Hua Ying's mind again. If the Great Tang still had a true cavalry force and a sufficient number of warhorses, would the chief still dare to advance so recklessly? No, what awaited the Golden Tribe royal court today was destruction. If there were really how could there be so many ifs in the world? There were never ifs. That was why the Golden Tribe royal court would not be destroyed today. That was why Chan Yu and his grassland cavalrymen dared to attack so recklessly. That was why the Northern Battlefront Army would face such an ending. He could even see the bleak color on the word ending and smell the despair in it. Different from General Hua Ying, the ordinary soldiers of the Northern Battlefront Army were still calm and determined. They did not know the secret military intelligence or the result of the sand table. They did not know, or even did not care about the odds of winning the battle. They only knew to fight, and they were as fearless as they were in the past. Looking at the Tang army who were silently preparing for the battle, Situ Elon slightly closed her eyes to hide the gloominess. Then she quickly raised her head and cheered herself up. She did not want to affect the morale of the army. She suddenly noticed a Tang soldier near the stove. At this time, all the Tang soldiers had finished their breakfast quickly and started to sharpen their weapons. Only that Tang soldier was still standing beside the pot, holding a big bowl in his left hand and a wooden spoon in his right hand. He was eating the vegetable porridge in big mouthfuls, and after eating the meat, he was even more happy to say something. "What's your name?" Situilan walked to the stove and said while looking at the Tang soldier. The Tang soldier was not old, but from the calluses on his fingers that held the porridge bowl and the indifferent expression on his face, it could be seen that he was a veteran who had been through hundreds of battles. The soldier looked at her and was stunned. He put the bowl on the stove and saluted. He reported, "I'm Wang Wu, the commander of the 4th Scout Team of the Vanguard Battalion. Nice to meet you, General." "Wang Wu. That's a neat name," Situilan said. "But you are not neat enough. Didn't you see that the others have already returned to the camp to prepare for the battle? Why are you still here?" Wang Wu showed respect to her, but it did not mean he was afraid. He explained in a sincere and funny way. "The scouts don't have to go to the battle for now. Besides, it will take at least 2 hours for the barbarians to arrive. Why are you in such a hurry? There is so much meat in the porridge today. It would be a pity if we don't finish it." Situilan slightly raised her eyebrows and said, "You are indeed a veteran." Wang Wu scratched his neck with the end of the wooden spoon and said with a smile, "You flatter me." Situilan said, "You have such a good appetite so early in the morning." It seems that you are very confident about today's battle. If everyone can be like you, or... She stopped abruptly when she said the word or. The lazy smile on Wang Wu's face suddenly disappeared. He looked at her calmly and even coldly and said, "General or what? Or a miracle? You know there is no miracle." Situilan stared at his eyes coldly. After a moment of silence, she said, "What do you want to say? There is a lot of meat in the porridge today, and even more vegetables. Although the food in the Northern Battlefront Army has always been excellent, it is still too good to be true. It makes me suspicious." Wang Wu was not afraid of her eyes at all. He calmly said, "Or this is the last meal before we die, so General wants us to have a good meal?" Situilan said coldly, "What do you want to say?" Wang Wu pointed at the Tang soldiers who were silently preparing for the battle in the tent not far away and said, "I know that we will definitely lose today's battle. In fact, many people know it, but they just don't say it." Situilan was silent for a long time. Wang Wu said, "If you think I have shaken the morale of the army, you can kill me on the spot." Situilan said, "What I want to know is why you are telling me this." Wang Wu said, "Because I want to tell General Su, the Imperial Court, and the Academy. I am not reconciled. I don't want to lose. I don't understand why the Northern Battlefront Army would end up like this." Situilan said in a low voice, "It is the mission of the Tang soldiers to guard the border for the country. Why are you not reconciled? The question is, why did General Su send us out of Guha? Why do we have to fight here? I am not afraid of death, but I don't want to be sent to die." Wang Wu suddenly became angry. He threw the wooden spoon into the porridge pot and shouted at Situilan. The Xiangwan Plain was ceded by the Imperial Court. The battlefield was chosen by the general's mansion. Why do you want us to die? Why do you want us to die? You generals, even if you want us to die, can't you win? Situilan reached out her hand to stop her soldiers from drawing out their swords. She was silent for a long time, because she did not know how to answer the old soldier's angry question. Yes, the Imperial Court wanted the Tang army to keep the enemy out of the border. They would do it even if they had to sacrifice their lives. But the Imperial Court should at least let them win. Otherwise, how could they die in peace? Then what do you want us to do? What do you want us to do? She looked at Wang Wu and asked in a serious tone. Wang Wu did not expect to hear such an answer. He was silent for a long time and smiled gloomily. He did not say anything and turned back to his camp. Situilan looked at his back and did not continue to ask. She had guessed what the young soldier wanted. It was what she wanted too. It was what the entire Northern Battlefront Army and even the Tang Empire wanted. Wang Wu walked back to his tent and stared at the half bag of hay outside for a long time. He was a scout, one of the few soldiers in the Northern Battlefront Army who had horses. But 2 years ago, his horse died outside the city of Wei. Since then, he had never had a chance to have his own mount. A scout without a mount was worse than a dog. Wang Wu often thought so. In the past 2 years, he felt that his life was worse than a dog's. If a dog could still bark, what could he do? Wang Wu kicked away the hay and was about to wash his face. When he saw the pale face in the bucket, he frowned and suddenly began to hate his current mood. He took a deep breath and suppressed the despair and anger in his heart. He drew out the broadsword he brought from the city of Wei and ordered his subordinates to prepare for the battle. A scout without a mount was still a Tang soldier. Even if it was a hopeless battle, he had to fight to the end. He looked at the Golden Tribe camp in the north and suddenly thought of the city of Wei. When the city of Wei was massacred by the Golden Tribe cavalry, only a few people escaped, and he was one of them. After returning to the Northern Battlefront Army, he got a mount again after his identity was verified. Then he lost it again, just like he used to have the city of Wei, but in the end he lost everything. Wang Wu often missed the days when he went hunting with General Ma on the grassland. He missed the days when he followed his seniors to the Shibi Lake to kill the horse gangs and rob gold and silver. Those days were gone forever. Under his indifferent and tired look, there was anger and hatred that had never been extinguished. He always thought about defeating the barbarians on the grassland with the Northern Battlefront Army and taking back the city of Wei. But it was difficult. And looking at the situation today, it seemed that that day would never come. He wanted a warhorse, a handsome one. He wanted to ride it and fight against the enemy. If he had a warhorse and his comrades all had warhorses, then his dream would come true. This obsession kept tormenting him. Looking at the horses in the Golden Tribe royal court, he almost went crazy. At this moment, as long as someone could give him a horse, he would give up all his wealth and even his life. He would even wash the feet of those stinky grassland barbarians and kill them later. If someone could give him a horse, he would do anything for that person. Unfortunately, there was no if. Wang Wu lowered his head and was about to wash his face. The bloodiest battle in 1,000 years would be coming. It would consist of countless battles and countless people would die. The Northern Battlefront Army might lose, and all the Tang soldiers would die for the country. He did not want to die with dirt on his face and vegetables in his mouth. The next moment, he suddenly felt dizzy because the water in the basin was shaking. His eyebrows and eyes looked strange in the water. They were not as gloomy as before but rather funny. The people of the Golden Tribe royal court, who were dozens of miles away, also felt the shaking. More than 100,000 grassland cavalries were preparing for the battle and feeding their horses water. Suddenly, they found that those brave but tame war horses suddenly became restless. Some of them kept shaking their heads and refused to drink water or eat fodder. Some of them looked somewhere in fear and kicked their front hooves anxiously, as if that was the only way to convince themselves that the shaking was not real, but not something they were most afraid of. The entire field started shaking. From the city of Wei in the north to the meadow outside Guha, the wheels of the wagons in the camps of both sides were squeaking. Some soldiers who were not paying attention even lost their balance because of the shaking. Ade jumped onto the roof of a big car and squinted his eyes to look at the place where the tremor came from. His eyesight was very good, and he should be the first one to see the movement over there. Therefore, he was also the first one to be shocked speechless. That childish but proud and cold face was full of disbelief. Following that, more and more people saw the cause of the tremor. Wu Wu's eyebrows suddenly rose high, and the corners of his lips curled up high. His hands began to tremble, and the wet towel fell into the basin, splashing water everywhere. Just like him, the scouts inside and outside the camp, and the soldiers of the Northern Battlefront Army in the distance, all felt the vibration. They looked to the northwest. The camp became dead silent. Everyone was shocked and confused. But more than that, they were excited and expectant. The field under the morning sun was very clear. There was no wind, no dust, and the sight was very clear. On the horizon in the northwest, a large dark cloud was moving slowly. The reason why it was moving slowly was not because the dark cloud was moving too slowly, but because the area covered by the dark cloud was so wide that it gave people an illusion. The dark cloud quickly flew for more than 10 miles and came to the edge of the field near Guha. Everyone could see clearly that it was not a dark cloud, but a large area of dense smoke and dust. The smoke and dust were the dust caused by the hooves of the horses. Countless wild horses were sweeping towards them. The morning sun reflected the sky red. The warm light entered the smoke and dust, as if the morning glow was plucked from the sky to the ground. The galloping horses seemed to be burning. It was extremely beautiful and dazzling. No one could count how many wild horses were hiding in the morning glow. No one could figure out how many wild horses could cause such an earth-shattering scene. People only knew that an unimaginable number of wild horses had suddenly appeared in the world. These wild horses were running towards the Tang army. The grassland was still silent, so the hooves of the wild horses in the distance became clearer. It fell in everyone's ears like thunder and knocked on everyone's heart. All the soldiers in the vanguard battalion of the Tang army stopped preparing for the battle. No matter how strict the military discipline was, no matter how strong the spirit was, they could not stop looking at the morning glow and the overwhelming wild horses. Some Tang soldiers began to rub their eyes, wondering if they were dazzled. They told themselves in their hearts that it must not be, but they still found it unbelievable, because the scene was really unbelievable. Some Tang soldiers did not even blink their eyes, such as Wang Wu. He stared at the wild horses in the morning glow, as if he was looking at a little girl in a tavern in the city of Wei. He was afraid that if he blinked, those wild horses would disappear. Situ Ilan tightly pursed her lips. Her face was a little pale, and her hand holding the hilt trembled. She knew it was not an illusion, but she was not sure that those wild horses were really coming towards the Tang army. What if the wild horses suddenly ran to the vast grassland in the east and disappeared as suddenly as they came? What if they were just passing by? The Tang people's feelings were as complicated as their expressions. They were nervous, eager, shocked, worried, and even panicked. They watched the morning glow getting closer and closer, and the wild horses filling the sky getting closer and closer. They became more and more nervous. The morning glow finally dissipated and returned to dust. The grassland outside Guha was completely covered by the wind and sand. More than 100,000 warhorses in the tribe of the Golden Tribe neighed in panic. The sunlight was blocked, and it was difficult to see clearly. Situ Ilan closed her eyes and then opened them. Then she saw a brown wild horse in front of her, looking at her. The brown horse's eyes were full of curiosity like a human baby, extremely pure and innocent. As the dust gradually settled, the Tang army cheered. The soldiers' cheers were so loud that it was hard to describe. They even seemed a little crazy, like some kind of cry to vent their emotions. It was all true. Those who came to the Tang army in the morning glow were indeed horses. They were wild horses, countless wild horses. Those wild horses strolled casually in the Tang army's camp, as if they were strolling on the grassland. Their long manes fluttered in the morning breeze. They were extraordinarily handsome, and their eyes were full of curiosity. Just like the brown wild horse, it could not understand why the woman in front of it was crying. The wild horses could not understand why these humans were cheering, why their voices were so hoarse, why they kept rubbing their necks, why they were laughing, and why they were crying. That was because they did not understand that for the Tang people, their arrival was a real miracle. For the past 10 days, the past year, the past 3 years, the Tang Empire, from the emperor to the ministers, from the common people to the blood-soaked soldiers, had been praying for a sufficient number of warhorses. But they knew that it was an extravagant hope, because the Xiangwan plain was gone, and Taoism would not give the Tang Empire a chance. Seeing that the war that would determine the fate of the entire world was about to begin, people like General Hua Ying, Situ Ilan, and Wang Wu could not help but murmur. They were even willing to sacrifice their lives and dignity to pray for the Tang Empire, who no longer believed in Haotian, to give the Tang Empire a chance. The Tang Empire needed horses, war horses. Haotian seemed to have heard the voices of all the Tang people. as if she had forgotten about their betrayal. She stood in the morning glow and said 3 words to the quagmire in the depths of the wilderness. "We must have horses." So the Tang Empire had horses. The Tang army instantly entered a state of ecstasy. In sharp contrast, the dozens of tribes of the Golden Tribe royal court were still silent, and all the grassland people looked extremely pale. The Golden Tribe royal court dared to invade the south and start a war with the Tang Empire, and all the tribes followed Chanyu without hesitation. It was all based on one fact: the Tang army was short of horses. However, just before the war, countless wild horses came from the depths of the grassland. What was going on? Where did these wild horses come from? Why did the tribes live in the grassland all year round without knowing about the existence of these wild horses? Which grassland could support so many wild horses? Some elders of the tribes and a few brave travelers remembered a rumor from decades ago. It was said that in the depths of the West Wilderness, in the swamp where even the wolves did not dare to enter, lived a group of Pegasus who could walk on water and eat clouds. Those Pegasus were the mounts of the Tungri heaven, but they lived in the human world. Could it be that the black mass of wild horses in the south was the legendary Pegasus? If they were the mounts of the Tungri heaven, why would they go to the Tang army? The elders were pale, as if they were about to faint. The travelers were trembling, and the warriors of the tribes almost dropped their machetes. The women began to chant in a frightened tone, hoping to get the protection of the Tungri heaven. Looking at the overwhelming wild horses in the south, the grassland people suddenly felt that they had been abandoned by the Tungri heaven. No one understood why this happened. In the carriage behind them, the national master of the Golden Tribe did not understand either. But he knew that everything had changed. He sighed deeply. Several priests had been ordered to go to the Golden Tribe. He and the rest of the high priests formed a carriage array. He did not show up on the battlefield because he was afraid of Yu Lian and the Tang Empire. He had been persuading Chanyu not to act so rashly because he felt that the academy and the Tang Empire would not be so simple. Unfortunately, he failed to persuade them. The outcome of today's war seemed to have been decided, but some people did not think so. Looking at the dusty Tang army in the south, Chanyu's handsome face was still cold. As the overlord of the grassland, he pushed the Golden Tribe royal court to invade the south with great courage. He took the risk of being surrounded by the Tang army and fought this war head-on because he believed that he could win in the end. He wanted to avenge his brother. Most importantly, he wanted to rule the entire human world. He wanted his subordinates to become the nobles of every country in the Central Plains. He wanted his descendants to occupy the beautiful mountains and rivers in the south forever. Therefore, he had to win. This was what the Abbey Dean promised him, and he promised the Abbey Dean. Even now, even though he saw countless wild horses galloping over, he still did not lose confidence. To be more precise, other than his expression becoming a little ugly, his will was not affected in the slightest. General Lebu murmured. According to the news from Haotian Taoism, the Tungri heaven disappeared, and the Central Plains people are looking for her. Could it be that we disobeyed her will and sent these horses to help the Tang? Chanyu's eyes flashed with coldness. He stared at him and said coldly, "Stupid thing." Lebu did not dare to argue and left in silence. He thought he knew what Chanyu was thinking. The upcoming field battle on the Guha grassland would be a decisive one. The Golden Tribe could not afford to lose, nor could they afford to retreat, because the cavalry of the Golden Tribe had gone too far to the south, and it was too far for them to return home. Since they could not admit defeat or retreat, they could only fight on. How could they waver the morale of the army at this moment? Lebu understood the reason, so he kept silent when he was scolded as stupid. This has nothing to do with morale. The Tang will never win. Why? What do the Tangs want, even if they shed blood and kowtow? Horses. Wrong. Chanyu looked at the south with a cold and confident expression. What the Tangs want are not horses but war horses. Yes. Although Situ Ilan and Wang Wu thought every day that any kind of horse would be good as long as there were horses. In fact, only war horses were needed for the cavalry. War horses had to be trained for a long time. But now there was only a herd of wild horses on the grassland. Wild horses had never seen blood, never been to the battlefield, no saddle, no bridle. How could they ride them? How could they fight? No one could train tens of thousands of wild horses into war horses in such a short period of time. The morning had just arrived, and they were about to go to the battlefield. What else could those wild horses do except to watch? Hearing Chanyu's words, General Lebya's face suddenly brightened. He was the general in charge of the cavalry of the royal palace. The reason why he did not think of this was that he was stunned by the scene of tens of thousands of horses galloping. The Golden Tribe royal court began to speed up the preparation for the charge. The war horses, which had been frightened by the wild horses, calmed down a little under the comfort of their masters. They began to put on their leather armors and quiver. However, when they looked at their companions in the south, they still looked a little uneasy and disorderly. But just as Chanyu's cold and correct judgment, the Tang camp in the south was even more chaotic. The Tang army finally woke up from the ecstasy and tears. Hearing the news from the scouts in the distance, they started to prepare for the battle as fast as they could. But they found that the vanguard camp of the Northern Battlefront Army did not have enough riding equipment. It had been 3 years without mounts. None of the soldiers in the Northern Battlefront Army had thought of this problem beforehand. More troublesome things were yet to come. The Tang army found that although the wild horses were relatively friendly to them, they were extremely resistant to being reined in, let alone riding equipment. The Tang camp was full of wild horses galloping everywhere. Their mottled hair was flying everywhere. Some wild horses even knocked over the Tang army and ran away. Although they could not see what was going on in the Tang camp, they could hear the sounds of chaos and see the smoke and dust that represented chaos. The grassland cavalrymen, who already knew Chanyu's wise judgment, whistled mockingly in the direction of the Tang camp and waved their machetes to show their contempt. Right at this moment, an extremely unpleasant howl resounded in the world. The sound was like 2 rough stones rubbing against each other, but it also sounded like a broken wind box, giving off a feeling of exhaustion. It also sounded like a patient gasping for breath, but it did not stop at all. The unpleasant neigh pierced through the sky and earth. The mockery of more than 100,000 grassland cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe royal court was forcibly suppressed. The indignant neigh and strange snorting noises of the wild horses in the Tang camp suddenly disappeared. Tens of thousands of wild horses seemed to have heard the most terrifying sound. They did not dare to move anymore. They all looked at the place where the neigh came from and raised their necks high, like soldiers waiting to be inspected. The dust in the northwest of the wilderness was about to completely settle down. Something seemed to be coming out from inside. There were 8 divine horses, rarely seen in the mortal world, and they were dragging a shabby carriage. A black donkey sat in the shabby chariot. Much of the donkey's fur had been peeled off, and it looked rather pitiful. However, its expression was one of contentment. Perhaps it was because it was born with a heroic spirit, or perhaps it was because it was eating grapes and drinking wine. The black donkey looked down at all the horses in the wilderness, wild horses and war horses, like a real king. The wild horses in the Tang camp lowered their heads. The war horses of the Golden Tribe royal court were frightened. Mu Yu and the 6th brother walked out of the camp and toward the broken chariot. At this time, they saw the big black horse dragging the black chariot behind the broken chariot. It looked happy and fat. It seemed that it had been living well with its elders for the past 3 years. Mu Yu smiled. Because the grassland was too dry, her lips cracked and some blood flowed out. She and the 6th brother saluted the black donkey in the chariot. The black donkey nodded reservedly and returned the salutation. The big black horse rushed to Mu Yu and lowered its head to snuggle in her arms. But it suddenly remembered the guy who only had one arm and forced itself to move away. Mu Yu touched its neck. The big black horse stepped back and bowed to her and the 6th brother. Then the sound of wheels came from the Tang camp. Countless carriages came out of the supply camp and came to the vanguard camp. The carriages were filled with all kinds of riding equipment and sabers. The fourth brother, Fan Yu, was walking in the front. The disciples of the academy finally met in the wilderness. The saddle is on the horse's back, the reins are tightened, and the wild horse is calm. The cavalrymen of the Northern Battlefront Army gently touched the mounts that they used to be familiar with. They sighed with emotion. Their mounts were getting old and left. Only these mounts were still the same. Although they were a bit old, they were still good. Holding the water, Wang Wu moved closer to his mount and fed it. Looking at this wild horse that was still a little restless, he silently thought in his heart, I will really be your slave for the rest of my life. Now, let's go kill the enemies. Yes, let's go kill the enemies. The cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe Royal Court took the lead and attacked like a tide. The restless grassland warhorses, under the whipping of their masters and the pain of the spurs, burst out with courage and bravery. They forgot their instinctive fear and started to charge. The Tang army was much quieter than before. They did not get on their horses. They led the wild horses. No, from this moment on, they were war horses. They stepped on the hard soil of the grassland and walked slowly but firmly to the north. They were the Tang army. The strongest cavalry in the world had always been invincible. The war horses they led had been invincible in the swamp in the north of the West Wilderness for decades. The cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe Royal Court were strong, but they were nothing in front of them. Dust covered the sky above the grassland. Finally, it was time to get on the horses. Situ Ilan rode on the brown wild horse and slowly drew out her cold saber from the sheath. She raised the blade and pointed at the grassland cavalrymen. She was expressionless and did not speak. The bodyguard beside her suddenly roared angrily. All the Tang soldiers roared at the same time. Several years of depression, accompanied by this angry roar, turned into battle intent. Then it was a silent charge. It was suffocating and silent charge. Many cavalrymen of the Northern Battlefront Army were not familiar with charging. However, when they raised their sabers and urged their horses to charge forward, the familiar feeling came back to them. It was a feeling of invincibility. Countless clouds of dust cut the grassland. Countless iron streams rushed toward the Golden Tribe. In a moment, the sound of killing shook the sky. In the direction of Chilean City, on the side of Guha, all the cavalrymen of the Northern Battlefront Army rushed out of there. The black iron streams converged toward the Golden Tribe from 3 directions. If someone could see the grassland from the sky, he would be shocked speechless by this magnificent scene. The cold wind blew Situ Ilan's hair on her cheeks. She thought for victory. Wang Wu bit his lips, and his eyes were filled with determination. He thought, for the city of Wei, under the flag of the Golden Tribe. Chanyu looked very pale. Lebu anxiously urged him to retreat and join the national master at the rear. Chanyu did not speak. No one knew what he was thinking. Until now, he finally understood why the national master did not agree with his decision to take the risk. The academy, Ning Ke was so cruel. The Golden Tribe lost. He knew it clearly. With a pft, he spat out a mouthful of blood, swayed, and fell off the horse. On the meadow of Guha, Ning Ke put down the binoculars and thought of what he had seen. He was silent. He handed the binoculars to General Su Qi. Su Qi looked at him and asked, "You have endured for so many years just for today? Don't you think it's risky?" Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "This is the only way." Su Qi said, "If you had given the horses to me earlier, we could still win. But we can't kill them all." After saying this, he walked down the meadow. Situ Ilan wanted to win. Wang Wu wanted to win. So he wanted to kill them all. Therefore, from the very beginning, he wanted to kill them all. Please cast your monthly votes. Chapter 1087. What Ning Ke wanted to do had been decided a long time ago. It was just that he needed to think about how to do it thoroughly. So this is my solution. I have worked hard to think and write about this plot seriously. I hope everyone will be satisfied. From the beginning, he only had one thing in mind: to kill them all. From the beginning, I only had one thing in mind: to serve all of you. Well, this is not pretentious, nor is it mushy, because I am also one of you. I will choose the solution and plot that I am more willing to see. Compared to the words willing to see, Other things will be relatively later, such as things like military ability. Well, I have never thought about it from the beginning. I am originally a military idiot, but it does not affect the things I write. I am very happy. I like this plot. And Ninkei, who is not liked by others. If you have the same opinion as me, please encourage and support me. Or from the beginning, what I wanted to do was to solicit monthly votes. Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow. Chapter 1088. The setting sun was as red as blood. Hua Ying, the vanguard general of the northern battlefront army of Tang, stood in the howling wind and looked at the fading dust. He finally relaxed and was supported by Situ Ilan. Blood and corpses were everywhere in the field hundreds of miles away from Guha. The strong wind from the north had been blowing for a whole day, so the smell of blood was not so strong. But the world was still red. The preparation for the war started in the early morning, and the cavalry started to fight before noon. They fought until dusk. Of course, the Tang army was the final winner. The cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court suffered heavy casualties. Chanyu was in a coma. Several high priests sent to the front line died in the melee. At the last moment, the young slave Ada was summoned back by the nation master. He escorted the badly wounded Lebu and retreated with the remaining soldiers. That was how he escaped the fate of being crushed by the cavalry. General Su Qi had prepared 700 black armored cavalrymen for this young slave. They had been waiting at the edge of the battlefield for this young slave to kill him when he brought up the rear. The Golden Tribe Royal Court retreated to the north. The Tang army started to chase after them, and the Tang army started to clean up the battlefield. This was the fiercest battle in 1,000 years, so it naturally created the most tragic battlefield. Arms were cut off by padeos, bodies were disemboweled, pools of black blood were everywhere, annoying mosquitoes and flies were everywhere, and painful moans were everywhere. The medical team of the Tang army kept moving in the field. The cavalrymen carried stretchers with excellent horsemanship and sent the injured comrades to the barracks. The most seriously injured soldiers would be dragged back to the Guha military village by carts for further treatment. They were fighting against time to save as many people as possible. Apart from treating their comrades and collecting weapons and armors, there was another important task, which was to accept the surrender, collect the captives and the wounded soldiers who could no longer fight. Hundreds of Tang soldiers walked in the field with their horses, but strangely, they did not see any captives. A grassland barbarian was lying in the wild grass, staring at the gray sky with despair in his eyes. His slightly rising and falling chest showed that he was not dead yet. His pale face was covered with blood. A shadow fell on his face, followed by the blade of the knife. A cavalryman of the Golden Tribe was pinned down by the corpse of his mount. His lungs were pierced by his broken ribs. Blood kept spurting out from his lips. He could not die immediately and kept howling in pain. When he saw the Tang soldiers walking over with blood-stained padeos in their hands, he showed no fear or despair. Instead, he showed a joyful expression and shouted something in the language of the prairie, full of begging. The common soldiers of the northern battlefront army could understand the barbarian language, so the Tang soldiers understood it. They looked at each other and hesitated. At this moment, Wang Wui limped over. He raised his saber and killed the dying cavalryman of the Golden Tribe. He also cut off his head. A Tang soldier said, "We just don't want to give him a quick death. Whether he's in pain or not has nothing to do with us. I didn't chop off his head to show my benevolence. It's just that there are still so many heads to chop off. I don't have time to wait for you." After saying that, Wang Wu led his warhorse and walked towards the meadow where there were even more corpses. Behind him, there was a cart full of grassland barbarians' heads. Wang Wu and his comrades did not want to give those wounded grassland barbarians a quick death. They did it not because of humanity, but because they needed those heads. They wanted the heads of the grassland barbarians, not because of the merit. It was purely because the general's mansion had issued an order that all the heads of the grassland barbarians must be chopped off and collected. As for taking captives, there were no captives on the battlefield today. Hua Ying's pale face showed a satisfied smile as he looked around the wilderness, the setting sun, and the blood-red world. Then he coughed and his beard was splashed with blood. As the vanguard general, he had made the most contribution today. But he really did not care about it. And he knew that he did not need to care about it anymore. You should know why I've been suffering in the frontier all these years. Hua Ying's voice was a little intermittent. He seemed very tired, but his voice was clear and energetic. Situ Ilan did not say anything. She helped him sit on the meadow. The Hua family was loyal to Liu. They had played a dishonorable role in the battle for the throne a few years ago, but they were suppressed by Ning Ke and the late empress. Hua Shanhua died, and the Hua family quickly declined. They believed that after this battle, they would forget about the past. But it was hard for Hua Ying to forget about the past. The Academy, or Mr. 13, is really a cold-hearted man. Looking at the tragic scene around him, he thought of the Hua family's miserable experience and the dozens of Gushan commandery soldiers who were sent to the front line to die. He shook his head. If he had let the Northern Battlefront Army take those wild horses in advance, or even if he had just told the general or me, I don't think so many people would have died in the past 3 years. Situ Ilan did not say anything. As a student of the academy, a former friend and a current follower of Ning Ke, she did not agree with Hua Ying, but she could not defend herself at this moment. Because the Tang army had paid too much for the lack of war horses in the past 3 years. Too many people had died today. But I like it very much. Hua Ying suddenly laughed. Full of admiration and emotion, he continued, the Golden Tribe is really powerful. His method should have the least casualties. But in the process, he had to be ruthless to the end. Only by doing so could he win the war with the least cost. I admire him and sympathize with him. It was complicated and even illogical, but Situ Ilan understood it. Hua Ying looked at the grassland in the distance, under the twilight. He looked at the dust, the enemies who were running in panic, and the soldiers of the northern military camp who were not far behind. He finally closed his eyes. He still had a smile on his face, a satisfied smile. Defeating the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, and watching the talented and bold Chanyu and the unfathomable nation master run away like dogs was undoubtedly the best thing for a future Tang general. He could finally rest in peace after seeing this scene. Situ Ilan put her hand in front of his nose and paused for a long time. Finally, she let go of his hand and put the body on the meadow. She signaled the military doctor who had been waiting for him to handle the body. She stood up, still in the wind. Part of the flag of the Tang Empire was burnt in the fierce battle. It was black and ugly, but the golden thread inside was still dazzling in the twilight, as if it would last forever. She looked around with the broken flag, and then to the north. The remaining forces of the Golden Tribe Royal Court were running north at full speed. The Northern Battlefront Army had defeated the main force of the Royal Court, but it did not mean that they were completely wiped out. Hua Ying did not remind her anything before he died. He did not tell her that she could not let Chanyu escape. He knew very well that the Golden Tribe Royal Court would not be able to survive this time, because the grassland people had gone south to the Tainan. If the grassland people had stayed at the front line of the 7 stockade villages, instead of attacking like wildfire, even if they were defeated, they would have a great chance to escape to the depths of the grassland, just like they had done hundreds of years ago. The grassland was so vast that it would be difficult to fight or find them in summer. By then, it would be difficult for the Tang army to wipe them out. But now the grassland people had gone too far south, and even passed through the Xiangwan plain. How could they escape? Situ Ilan did not think the grassland people could escape, and she would not allow them to do so. She looked at the messy dust in the north and said, "Take a rest and get ready to chase." It was noisy in the vanguard camp of the Northern Battlefront Army. The smell of numbing powder was everywhere. In the iron furnace room on the east side, the sound of hitting weapons could be heard, but not many people were talking. After a whole day of bloody battle, the generals and soldiers were exhausted to the extreme. The Tang army also paid a terrible price. Even General Hua Ying died of blood loss and exhaustion. The atmosphere in the barracks was good, but it was quiet because they had regained hope in a desperate situation, and then defeated the strong enemy. The flattest meadow behind the vanguard camp had been isolated. It was even quieter than the camp. Even the sound of the black donkey chewing grapes could be heard clearly. Fourth brother walked to the shabby sedan and pointed at his younger brother and younger sister. He introduced them to the black donkey. They are sixth brother and seventh sister. I entered the school earlier than them, so I am the fourth. The black donkey was still very reserved. He nodded and said nothing, but he was thinking that it was lucky that they were not third or third brother. Otherwise, he would have to greet them first if he entered the school earlier. The big black horse shook his head and ran over excitedly. He looked around, but did not see the familiar figure. He suddenly lowered his head and looked a little disappointed. I don't know where youngest brother is, fourth brother explained. In fact, no one knows where he is since he left Chang'an. The mysterious national master did not participate in this bloody battle. He helped Chanyu from the beginning and led the most elite and loyal Duor cavalry to retreat to the north quickly. Perhaps it was because of this that Ning Kai did not participate in the battle. He did not appear after the battle. No one knew where he went. Just like the past spring, he disappeared again. The big black horse was a little disappointed. He walked to the top of the meadow and looked at the sun that was gradually being swallowed by the ground. He was silent. He knew that the sun was actually swallowed by the Black Sea in the north. The sun that never sets on the grassland was the emperor of the desolate man empire. Then it was the great divine priest of light, who founded the devil's doctrine. Then it was Chanyu of the golden tribe royal court. Chanyu had always thought that he was the sun. Even if he set, he would still rise again tomorrow. But today he felt that it would be difficult for him to rise again. The most loyal Duor cavalry escorted him to the city of Wei. General Lebia's injuries were stabilized, and he recovered quickly with the help of the high priest. When the young slave Ada stood silently in front of his bed, he still had enough power and enough powerhouses. He still had the national master, but he still felt that he was struggling at the bottom of the cold sea and would suffocate at any time. Because he was very afraid. This chapter has been edited. Chapter 1089. The main cavalry of the royal court was defeated. Many tribes no longer followed his footsteps and scattered on the grassland. They would become the captives of the Tang cavalry, or even be taken advantage of by the horse gang. This scared him. Just a moment ago, he was about to become the ruler of the entire world. And in the next moment, he was shot in the cheeks by a hidden arrow on his way to the throne. Blood flowed out, and the blood was very ugly. No matter who it was hard for anyone to accept this fact. His confidence and ambition were crushed to the point where they couldn't be any more shattered. This scared him. What scared him the most was that when he saw tens of thousands of wild horses coming in the morning glow, and those miraculous things happening in front of him, he realized that all these years of high spirits and the great ambition of riding horses to the Central Plains were actually a scam. This was the Academy's plot, and that person's plot. A few years ago, the West Hill Divine Palace and the Tang Empire made peace, and the Golden Tribe Royal Court benefited the most from it. Whether it was the cession of the Xiangwan Plain or the surrender of the war horses, it was like putting a rope around the neck of the Tang Empire. Now it seemed that the Tang Empire was showing weakness and tempted the royal court to take the risk of moving south. Ning Kai, Ning Kai, Ning Kai. He murmured this name many times, so many times that it went deep into his bones. He did not understand. This plot of the Academy was actually very risky. If there was a slight problem, the grassland cavalry could easily sweep the Central Plains. Then why did the Academy do this? What else was worth the risk of the Tang Empire other than the extinction of the Golden Tribe? When did the Academy become so cold-blooded? What kind of hatred did Mr. 13 have with him? Chanyu thought for a long time and gradually calmed down. He was talented and bold, even though he was defeated by the Tang outside Guha, and even saw the real picture of the abyss of destruction. He was still a big shot. How could he be reconciled? He calmed down again and decided to take a risk. Since the Tang Empire could set up a plot, endure for 3 years, and take the risk to achieve great achievements. Why couldn't he take the risk? Why couldn't he succeed? He believed that the Tingri heaven did not abandon him. Not long after, the respected elders of the tribe, Ada, General Buell, and the high priest who was the representative of the national master, all came to his room. They saw Chanyu's back facing the sand table in silence. The Chanyu pointed at an inconspicuous small city on the sand table and said calmly, I know the Tang people and many people in the tribe think that the war is over, and that the battle that day was the final battle. But I don't think so. This is the city of earth under our feet, and it is also the place I chose for the final battle. No one understood what he meant. The royal court was far from being a match for the Tang Empire. Even if they wanted to fight to the death, how could the other party give them the chance? In other words, what right did the royal court have? The Tang, or the Academy's goal is to destroy the tribe. They want to kill us all. Our goal now is to escape from the Tang's pursuit and return to our homeland. We don't have any provisions. There are some in the Chiching stockade. I've already sent Su Yong to get them. Those rations aren't enough to support us back. Hundreds of thousands of people are naturally not enough. But if only 30,000 people go, it's still enough. The Tang people will always be following us. So we need a victory, a decisive victory that will throw the Tang people into chaos. Only then can we keep the last flame of the tribe. The Chanyu looked at the flat field on the sand table, and the 7 cities above it. After a moment of silence, he said, Su Chi wants to kill us all, so he can only gather his troops and push towards the north. The formation can't be too thick. If 10,000 duo or cavalry break through the central line and attack the northern military camp, or even further south, do you think the Tang Empire will not be shaken? How will the Academy react? General Buell said, the main force of the Tang army will arrive tomorrow morning. Su Chi will not make such a mistake. The world's best general in defense, of course, will not make such a mistake. But that was in the past. Just like how I would not make the mistake of charging with all my troops. The Chanyu shook his head and said, I did not see through the Academy's plan. Su Chi has to follow the Academy's plan, because the Academy wants all of us to die. He can only do so. The room was silent. Everyone felt that something was wrong. Chanyu's decision was not a risk, but a crazy gamble. No, it was not even a gamble. It was more like turning back and shouting helplessly before entering the abyss of despair. Even if Su Chi could really arrange the Tang army into the easiest line, even if the duo or cavalry could really break through to the south, they could not change the whole situation. Ada's eyes lit up. He completely understood what Chanyu meant. Chanyu did not want to win at all. He only wanted to take 20,000 elite cavalries with him. Then he would lose the war, and the Tang Empire would not get what they wanted. After they recuperated and Taoism stabilized the south, they might be able to win the whole world again. After a moment of silence, Buell said, I'll go. No one argued with him. This was not about military exploits, nor was it about dying for the imperial court. It was a cold consideration of reality. Neither Ada nor the priests were able to command a large number of cavalries. The high priest said, the nation master will accompany us to escort the Chanyu back. Ada did not say anything. He knew his role. When the duo or cavalry broke through the defense line of the Tang army and entered the southern grassland, or even the northern military camp to loot and kill, the Tang army would chase after the palace where Chanyu was at the fastest speed. The fastest speed required the shortest distance, and the shortest distance was a straight line. This seemed to be the theory from the Academy. The palace would return from the city of Wei to the north, and the Tang would chase from there. What he had to do was to guard the only street in the city of Wei. Ada bowed to the Chanyu and turned to leave. He walked to the street, pushed open a dusty old shop and sat by the table. He did not leave again. The rest of the people left the room and started to prepare for the escape and the south. After the nation master knew the plan of the Chanyu, he naturally had to make corresponding arrangements. The house was empty. The Chanyu turned to the window and looked at the bright moon in the night sky. He seemed to have gained some kind of strength from the warm and loving light. After the city of Wei was slaughtered, most of the houses were uninhabitable. The grassland people were used to living in tents outside the city, The place he stayed in today was a relatively secluded courtyard. He did not know who this courtyard used to belong to. He did not know who used to belong to the city of Wei, so he did not know why that person wanted to kill him. If he knew that Tungri had lived here for many years, maybe he would think differently. The battle that took place on the grassland outside Guha was the most spectacular and tragic cavalry battle in 1,000 years since the Tang defeated the Desolate Man. The number of cavalrymen from the Golden Tribe Royal Court who participated in this battle was more than that of the Tang army. Besides, the Tang cavalry had hardly received any cavalry training over the years. Logically speaking, the royal court had the upper hand, but the Tang army won in the end. Especially before the northern battlefront army's ambush, the cavalry of the vanguard battalion managed to block the royal court's cavalrymen. That was because the Tang army had more strength than the royal court's cavalrymen. That was the spirit of valiance. The Tang army had this spirit, and so did the wild horses they rode. In the spring wind of the grassland, the Tang army waved their padeos and silently hacked their enemies to death one after another. Those wild horses trampled on the wildflowers and grass and galloped recklessly. They even imitated the Tang army and humiliated the grassland horses of the palace. The Battle of Guha was destined to be recorded in the magnificent picture of history. In hindsight, this cavalry battle might not be the decisive battle of the whole world, but it was definitely the most important one. After winning the war, even if the Golden Tribe Royal Court still had the power to fight, they would not be able to pose any threat to the foundation of the Tang Empire. To put it more directly, even if the Golden Tribe Royal Court exerted all their power after that day, they would not be able to destroy the Tang Empire. For the whole world, what was more important was that the Tang Empire had solved the big problem in the north for many years. Now the emperor and ministers in Chang and could focus all their energy and resources on the south. If they could stabilize the situation before Taoism solved the internal dispute, Peach Mountain would face unimaginable pressure. A few days later, Situ Ilan led the cavalry of the vanguard battalion to the front line of the 7 stockade villages. At this time, she and all the Tang army had already won, but they wanted a bigger victory. During this time, the bodyguards of the northern military camp and a unit of the Western Expedition Army that was quietly transferred here from the Pamir Mountains half a year ago had bitten the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court like wolves at the cost of heavy sacrifices. They would not let go even if they were bleeding all over. The cavalry of the Royal Court, who had always been known for their flexibility, was forced to slow down their retreat to the north. They had just entered the front line of the 7 stockade villages yesterday and were caught up by the main force of the Tang army. Under such circumstances, the grassland cavalry that had retreated to the 7 stockade villages did not dare to leave the villages and march to the grassland. It was tantamount to leaving their backs to the terrible Tang people. Even the Duor cavalry that had set up camp in the city of Wei did not dare to do so. It would inevitably mean destruction. The remaining 100,000 or so grassland cavalry set up camp in the 7 stockade villages in an attempt to temporarily stabilize the situation. After a stalemate, they would find time to escape the pursuit of the Tang army and escape into the depths of the grassland. However, those tribes that were still hoping for a fluke did not know that Chanyu had made a cold-blooded and only correct decision. He would use these tribal cavalry to attract the main force of the Tang army and try to thin the formation of the Tang army. Then he would send 10,000 elite Duor cavalry to the south unexpectedly. This arrangement would cost the lives of more than 100,000 grassland cavalry. If everything went well, it could be exchanged for 20,000 Duor cavalry and bigwigs, like Chanyu, to escape into the depths of the grassland. This exchange was cruel and seemed to be a loss, but it had to be done. Now that the Tang army had war horses, it would not be easy for the palace cavalry to retreat to the grassland. Especially now that the Tang army had obviously gone mad and were more terrifying than the grassland people, like a pack of wolves. If the Tang army focused on chasing them, the palace cavalry would not dare to turn back and intercept them. They would be completely annihilated in less than 300 miles. When Chanyu was making his final preparations, the Tang army surrounded the 7 stockade villages. It was not accurate to say that they were surrounded, because the grassland in the north seemed to be endless, and they could enter at any time. That was the path of survival that the Tang army left for the palace cavalry, but also the path of death. The main force of the northern battlefront army and the tribe's cavalry in the 7 stockade villages formed a stalemate. But the stalemate did not last long. Without any warning, the battle between the two sides began fiercely again. It seemed to be endless killing, and the lives of the soldiers from both sides were being taken away. There was chaos everywhere. 3 days later, the royal flag fluttered in the wind and dust filled the sky. The Tang's central military tent had arrived at the south of the city of Wei. Su Qi, the Tang's defender general of the state, had finally arrived at the front line. He was not late. As long as he could see the Golden Tribe being annihilated before the end of the war, he would not be considered late. Surprisingly, neither Su Qi nor Chanyu in the city of Wei gave any direct orders for the bloody battle on the hundreds of miles in the north of the continent. They just silently watched the cavalry charge and die, and then went to Kaiping and other stockade villages to replenish their forces. The war was a war between nations. It could not be finished in a day. Before the war was over, there was no time to rest. Only when one side died could they live. That was the truth. Therefore, Su Qi and Chanyu did not care. They just sent their men to the battlefield and let them kill or be killed by the enemy. For the Tang army, they had already won, so they wanted to kill as many of the enemy's forces as possible. Since they were going to annihilate the entire nation, that was the truth. A few simple sentences were far from enough to describe the bloody battle on the front line of the 7 stockade villages. It was not enough to describe the pressure faced by the remaining soldiers of the Golden Tribe royal court and the sacrifices made by the Tang army. People only needed to remember that in just a few days of siege, the number of people who died had almost exceeded the number in the Guha plain that day. Different from Kaiping, Chu City and other stockade villages, the city of Wei, which was supposed to be the main battlefield, was very quiet. There were no bloody scenes of cavalry charging and killing, not even the sound of hooves. The Golden Tribe royal court was here, and so was the central military tent of the Tang army. But the battle seemed far away. Su Qi looked at the dusty city through the binoculars. He frowned and remained silent. The only ones who can fight are the 30,000 Duor cavalry, a staff officer said confusedly. According to calculations, there are at least 10,000 Duor cavalry around the city of Wei. Is Chanyu really going to defend the city? The city of Wei was the smallest city among the 7 stockade villages. Not to mention that the grassland people were not good at defending cities. This small city could not accommodate 20,000 cavalrymen. Now the Duor cavalry had set up camp in the grassland north of the city, but they did not retreat before the Tang army arrived. Were they going to fight to the death here? Su Qi looked at the city and suddenly said, "They are going south again." When the officers in the central tent heard this, they all raised their heads in shock. After such a painful defeat, would the grassland people still dare to go south? Even if the Duor cavalry broke through the defense line and entered Xiangwan Plain, what could they do? Would they still dare to go to Chang'an? Suddenly, someone realized the problem. The defense of the central military tent is too weak. We should ask General Situ to help immediately. A staff officer said anxiously. Otherwise, if the Duor cavalry really broke through, the safety of the central military tent will be a big problem. Most importantly, once the situation becomes chaotic, Chanyu might really escape. There is no need to do those unnecessary things. Su Qi looked at the city and thought of the man's promise. He said, "Where do you think the Duor cavalry will attack from? Going around the city will consume too much of the horse's energy, and they will be easily killed by our crossbows. If I were Chanyu, I would definitely choose to go through the city if I really wanted to go south to create chaos." Su Qi did not say anything more. He turned around and walked to the back of the tent, ready to take a nap. He had not slept for several days and nights, so he was really tired. As for Chanyu's foresight, decision and courage, since he had already seen through it, there was nothing to worry about. Because someone had promised that nothing would go wrong. Su Qi slept soundly that night. When he woke up, the sky was still dark. It was the darkest time before dawn. He washed up and drank a bowl of mare's milk. Then he put on his armor and led his horse to the higher meadow beside the camp. He took off the telescope from the saddle and looked at the city again. At dawn, the world was quiet. The gates of the city were closed, and there was no light inside. It was like a ghost town. But Su Qi knew that Chanyu's strongest cavalry would soon rush out from that gate. He appeared calm in front of his soldiers, but he was actually a little worried. Otherwise, he would not have come early in the morning to observe the enemy and confirm the time of the enemy's attack. The main force of the Northern Battlefront Army had been transferred to Kaiping, Chu City and other battlefields. The central military tent was facing the main tent of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. When the 10,000 Duor cavalry rushed through the city, how could they resist? Su Qi had always thought that he could trust that person completely, but looking at the silent city before dawn, he still felt a little uneasy. The city was not high. The watchtower on the gate was only 3 feet away from the ground. When dawn came, people with better eyesight could even see the stubborn weeds in the yellow soil. When Su Qi was looking at the city, someone was also looking at him from the city. The national master of the Golden Tribe looked at the tents of the Tang army on the meadow in the distance. He looked at the warhorses eating grass with their heads lowered. His old face still did not regain its calmness after seeing the military intelligence reported by the palace cavalry. The Tang central military tent was very quiet. Thinking of the tragic scenes in the other cities and the royal court cavalry's struggle, he knew that Su Qi had already guessed Chanyu's intention. But why was he so cooperative? The national master did not want to calculate the success rate of Chanyu's risky strategy. Since the royal court had been forced to the abyss by the Tangs, they had to put up a struggle. They could not fall so easily. The last choice was the best choice, wasn't it? Yes, he knew it was from the academy. Su Qi's confidence probably came from the academy. Since the beginning of the war, the academy had not really made a move. The real powerhouses had not made a move yet. In the quiet dawn, the national master looked at the sky, waiting for someone to come. Chapter 1090. The national master looked at the sky, because he knew someone would jump down from the sky soon. The powerhouses of the academy would not care about the Duor cavalry, who were attacking from the south, because there were too many of them. Except for Jun Mo before he lost his arm, no one could stop them. One man holding the pass against tens of thousands of cavalry. This had not happened many times in history. It had nothing to do with cultivation state and strength. It was related to an indescribable aura. Even if Yu Lian and Tang appeared in the south of the city of Wei, they would not be able to do it. Or in other words, both of them would not do it. In this case, the academy would not care about the Duor cavalry. On the contrary, the academy would take the chance to kill the national master and dozens of high priests when the royal court was desperate. As for Ada and General Buell, they would definitely be the targets of the academy, and this would be the perfect opportunity for the royal court. On a dangerous battlefield, in front of a hopeless abyss, everything that seemed like an opportunity could actually be a trap. No one could completely figure out the hidden information unless Haotian returned to the human world. In that case, the two sides would only be competing on determination, willpower, speed and luck. He was very clear that if the Duor cavalry could defeat the Northern Battlefront Army, where Su Qi was before the academy succeeded, then the battle around the city of Wei would come to a conclusion. Even if the powerhouses of the academy came together and defeated the powerhouses of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, they would not be able to achieve their original goal. The extermination of the Duor cavalry would become a joke. That was the goal of Chanyu and the national master. No matter how he looked at it, the Golden Tribe Royal Court had a chance to escape this morning. The national master thought silently. At this moment, the darkness finally could not stand the torture of time. It gradually thinned and a faint light shone from behind. Although the sun had not risen from the grassland, it was already morning. The morning light shone on the national master's old face. It was like a clear stream flowing into a cracked field. After a moment of nourishment, it was sucked dry and could no longer be seen. The crack in the field seemed to be unfathomable. It was said that the 23-year cicada Yu Lian and the hierarch of the divine halls of West Hill were the two most mysterious people in the cultivation world. In fact, the nation master was just as mysterious. No one knew how old he was, or who his master was. But it was obvious that he was not good at the methods that the grassland barbarian priests were best at. His cultivation seemed to be a combination of the ideas of many sects, but it did not belong to any sect of Buddhism or diabolism. It was hard to describe. In fact, even the nation master himself sometimes did not understand what kind of dharma he had been cultivating throughout his long life. Because he grew up with the high priest of the grassland. He was not the high priest of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, but the high priest of the right royal court. Therefore, he had been learning Buddhism from the very beginning. When he came to the Golden Tribe Royal Court, he met Xiong Chumo, who was severely injured by Yu Lian, or Lin Wu, the Grand Master of the Devil's Doctrine at that time. He saved Xiong Chumo's life. To show his gratitude, Xiong Chumo taught him the secret divine skills of the divine halls of West Hill. He even traveled to Chang'an. Buddhism, Taoism, and witchcraft were all his cultivation. In terms of knowledge, he could definitely be ranked among the top 5 in the world. He had mastered 3 paths, so his state was naturally unfathomable. However, he still wanted to figure out what he wanted to cultivate in the end, especially after taking the former Chanyu as his disciple and becoming the national master of the Golden Tribe. This desire grew stronger. He knew where this desire came from. It was the sense of belonging or root that everyone wanted to find. It was not until many years ago that he felt the great will of Haotian. He felt that his body and soul had been washed by snow water and became abnormally clean. He finally understood that it was not important what kind of dharma he practiced. His sense of belonging had nothing to do with his sect or sect. It was only related to his faith. As long as the faith was right, so what if he cultivated evil? As long as the goal was right, so what if he practiced evil? Perhaps it was because he understood this that his state became more and more unfathomable. No one knew how far he had gone. During the right to light in the Peach Mountain, he did not really fight. That was because Ning Ke used Haotian to control the world. He was too powerful, and he did not want the world to know. Because of his faith, he had to defeat the academy. Even though he had a high state, he still had to spend a lot of effort in preparation to defeat those unimaginable people in the academy. When Yu Lian disappeared from the eastern wilderness, he knew that the day was coming. He had prepared calmly for 3 years. Those carriages that were quietly parked by the mud walls of the city of Wei had also been waiting for 3 years. Even if it did not work, he had a way to trap those too. In this story of the city of Wei, apart from the waiting and forbearance of the national master and the powerhouses of the grassland and the academy, there was another important thing: whether the duo or cavalry could break through the central military camp of the Tang army. In the morning light, it was quiet inside and outside the city. It seemed that everyone was sleeping, but in fact no one was sleeping. Countless pairs of eyes were staring at the city gate with vigilance. With a very low squeak, the city gate of the city of Wei slowly opened from the inside. Many tiny dust particles came out from the gap of the double plywood door and sprinkled like pearls in the morning light. A sharp warning suddenly pierced the silent sky and spread in all directions. The Tang army's camp in the south of the city suddenly came to life. The Tang army, who had been prepared for a long time, carried all kinds of military equipment and were busy preparing. The final battle between the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe Royal Court had begun as usual. The city gate slowly opened, and a grassland cavalryman slowly walked out. Both the cavalryman and the warhorse were covered in tough leather armor. Only their eyes were exposed, and they were indifferent and proud. The grassland cavalryman held a long machete in his hand, and wore a white cloak around his neck. The cloak fluttered in the morning wind, looking like white clouds in the blue sky. Because their cloaks were like white clouds, they were called the Duo Cavalry. The Duo Cavalry was the source of their pride. They were the strongest and most loyal cavalrymen of the Golden Palace Chanyu, and the most terrifying existence on the grassland. In the past hundreds of years, even the richest Golden Palace could only support 6,000 Duo Cavalry at most. It was these 6,000 Duo Cavalry that were the biggest deterrent to the Tang Cavalry. With the official rise of the Golden Palace, especially with the continuous secret support from the Central Plains under the leadership of Taoism, Chanyu now had a total of 36,000 Duo Cavalry. In the cavalry battle outside Guha, it was the Duo Cavalry who joined the battle at the end. They sacrificed all their men to stabilize the situation and prevent the Golden Palace from collapsing. For this, the bodies of 6,000 cavalrymen were still rotting on the grassland in the spring wind. After retreating north to the 7 stockade villages, Chanyu ordered 20,000 Duo cavalry to reinforce Kaiping and Chu City to attract the main force of the Tang cavalry. He only left the most elite and powerful 10,000 cavalrymen in the city of Wei. 10,000 cavalrymen was not a small number. As far as the eye could see, it must be a dark mass that could cover a large area of the grassland. But now the Tang army could not see 10,000 cavalrymen, only one. They could only see the grassland cavalryman at the gate of the city of Wei, his cloak flying in the morning wind. The grassland cavalryman lifted the reins with his left hand and lightly hit the warhorse's belly with his boot heel. The warhorse slowly moved forward. Tap, 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 tap. The hoofbeats were slow and clear. The grassland cavalryman kicked the horse's belly again. The warhorse slowly sped up. Tap, 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 tap. At this time, they were already 20 feet away from the gate. The grassland cavalryman kicked the horse's belly again. The warhorse sped up again. Tap, 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 tap. One horse charged towards the Tang camp. A lone rider charging into the camp. The grassland cavalryman knew he would die, but he did not care. Inside the gate of the city of Wei, a black wall vaguely appeared. The black wall was moving forward. Another white wall appeared. The black wall was the cavalryman and the warhorse. The white wall was the white cloak worn by the cavalryman. It was the Duo cavalry in a row. Black and white mixed together to form waves, snow-born in the sea of ink. Countless Duo cavalry were ready to charge with the brave cavalrymen. In the city of Wei, the hoofbeats had yet to be heard, but they were about to be heard. If it was thunder, it must be muffled thunder. If it was a drum, it must be a huge drum. The grassland cavalryman, who first left the city, had already arrived at the meadow. The indifference in his eyes, which was not covered by his leather armor, had been replaced by fanaticism and brutality. He raised the bloodthirsty machete in his hand and was ready to really speed up. The next moment, 10,000 grassland cavalrymen would follow him and charge towards the Tang camp. At that time, 10,000 white clouds would bloom on the grassland. The hoofbeats grew louder and louder. Who could stop them? Su Qi, the Tang's defender general of the state, was in the central military tent. There were 6,000 cavalrymen and 10,000 well-trained infantrymen. Logically speaking, there should not be much to worry about. But the commander's tent had chased them through the night, and there were many supplies that had not arrived yet. Most importantly, there were many engineers and civilian workers who were still on the way. It was very difficult for the hastily laid fortifications to be as sturdy as before. At this moment, if the Duo cavalry, who were feared by the horse gang on the grassland, charged over, everyone in the central military tent would be in big trouble. When the gate of Wei opened and the grassland cavalrymen appeared, everyone in the central military tent looked at Su Qi. They were not panicking, but rather anxious. They were not panicking because Su Qi was the best military genius in the world. Otherwise, how could he use the northern battlefront army to block the Golden Tribe royal court outside the 7 stockade villages for more than 10 years? But they were still anxious because the Golden Tribe royal court was obviously going all out today. If they were not careful and let the Duo cavalry gain the upper hand, it would be terrible. The only cavalry that the Tang army could win against the Duo cavalry was the black armored cavalry. But most of them were in the south to defend against the papal cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill. Thousands of black armored cavalry from the northern military camp had been sent to Kaiping by Su Chi 2 days ago to help Situ Ilan clear the grassland forces there. How could they stop the Duor cavalry? The grassland cavalryman was speeding up, and the hoofbeats became coherent. The cavalrymen at the gate of Wei, like a black sea in white waves, had not started charging. They were waiting to do so. The grassland cavalryman and his horse drew a straight line on the field under the morning light. It was a line written with courage and courage. The tens of thousands of Duor cavalry behind him would follow the line he drew with his life. They would charge fiercely and fearlessly. That was the rhythm the Golden Tribe Royal Court wanted. It was the rhythm of a bloody battle to the end, a rhythm of blood flowing like a river. It would start as gentle as a drizzle, and then as terrifying as a storm. It was continuous and unstoppable. If the grassland cavalrymen entered that rhythm, the Tang army would be in danger. By then, it would be meaningless even if they killed the first Duor cavalry. But now it seemed that there was no better way to break the rhythm. The city of Wei was far away from the Tang army. Even the best archer could not kill the grassland cavalrymen in advance. As for the most powerful defensive weapon of the Tang army, the crossbow battalion based on arrays, their shooting range was far from enough. So they could only prepare for the frontal charge of the tens of thousands of Duor cavalry. People looked at Su Chi, waiting for his orders. The most important thing to do now was to move the crossbow battalions from the east and west sides to the center of the army. Once the crossbow battalions were moved, the grassland cavalrymen might attack from both sides of the city wall. But the most important thing now was to guard the center. Su Chi did nothing. He just looked at the dusty city in the north under the morning light, and listened to the louder and louder hoofbeats, without any expression on his face. General, Marshal. People in the tent looked at him anxiously. They did not understand why he was so silent. Did the general have a brilliant plan? Or was the general worried about the two flanks, and decided to defend to the death? Su Chi ignored his subordinates' puzzled, anxious, and even slightly angry gazes. He just quietly looked at the plains in the north, at the Duor cavalry that was getting closer and closer. The hoofbeats were monotonous, as they charged into the camp alone. It was quiet between heaven and earth. The field between the city of Wei and the Tang camp seemed to have lost all color. The green grass turned gray, and the morning light dimmed, forming a very flat and dark background screen. The brave grassland cavalryman was the only existence in it. The grassland cavalryman was already more than 100 feet away from the city of Wei. The monotonous hoofbeats became clearer and clearer, like drumbeats beating on the field. The gray grass fell to the ground, and the morning light became distorted. The whole world seemed to be shaking. After a while, 10,000 of the most elite grassland cavalrymen would charge out of the city. At that time, the drumbeats would shake heaven and earth, and the world would be restless. Who could stop all this? Who could break the rhythm of the Duor cavalry? The city of Wei was silent. Heaven and earth were silent. Suddenly the wind blew. The grassland cavalryman fell down. The grassland cavalryman who was charging alone, bravely, resolutely, and silently fell down in the beautiful morning light. A very thin stream of blood splashed in the air. It was abnormally clear under the morning light. The world regained its original color. The dim and cold light became warm again. Death was coming, but it warmed up. Or maybe it was because they finally saw hot blood. The grassland cavalryman fell down from the horse, and his body fell heavily on the field. The saddle of the Duor cavalry was specially made. It did not tie the horse's feet. The horse continued to charge forward for more than 100 feet, before it felt something strange and slowly stopped. It looked back at its master who fell on the field, and slightly raised its head. It was a little confused, and did not know what had happened. The cavalryman lay on the field in front of the city gate. He did not move, did not struggle, and did not cry out in pain. Because he was no longer breathing. He didn't make any sound, and he didn't leave any last words that were as magnificent as mountains and rivers. He knew he was going to die, but he did not expect that he would die so quietly and so insignificant. The duo or cavalry and the horse were covered with tough leather armor. Only their eyes were exposed. He opened his eyes and looked at the sky, which was getting bluer. His vitality had disappeared, and only blood was flowing. There was a wooden arrow stuck in his eye. It was a very ordinary wooden arrow. No one knew where the arrow came from. In the quiet field, there was the morning light, the wind, the grass, but no one. I still think I wrote it well. Chapter 1091. In front of the city of Wei, there was a lonely horse and a lonely corpse in the field. Just like the confused warhorse, the people in the city of Wei and the Tang camp did not know what happened. Where did the arrow come from? There was a deathly silence in the wilderness. It was absolute silence. Everyone was stunned. After some time, the hoofbeats sounded again. Another grassland cavalryman set off from the city gate and slowly rode towards the Tang camp in the south. Everyone stared at this cavalryman, knowing that he would die in the next moment. The commander of the duo or cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court obviously wanted this cavalryman to die, so that he could find out where the arrow came from. There was a soft hum, and there was a slight breeze in the morning light. The cavalryman's cloak fluttered in the wind and dissipated before he could turn into a cloud. Just like his life. Another ordinary arrow pierced deeply into his eye socket, causing a spray of blood to spurt out. When this cavalryman was shot to death, he was only a few dozen feet away from the city of Wei. The hoofbeats sounded again, and several grassland cavalrymen rushed out of the city of Wei. The cavalrymen kept waving their leather whips, leaving bloody marks on the warhorse's buttocks. Their shouts broke the silence in front of the city gate. They were unafraid of death. At this speed, even the best warhorse could not last long. It was not enough to support these cavalrymen from the city of Wei to the Tang camp in the south. But obviously they did not care. This time, the grassland people did not care about the rhythm, nor did they care about using time and speed to accumulate momentum. From the beginning, they rode at the fastest speed. They just wanted to rush out of the city gate. They could not let the arrow that came from nowhere destroy the momentum of the duo or cavalry. They could not let the arrow break the rhythm of the duo or cavalry. They had to prove something. Even if they would be shot to death soon after they got out of the city gate, it would at least prove that the mysterious and powerful archer could not do anything more unimaginable and could not stop all the cavalrymen. But what happened next was really unimaginable. The morning breeze blew gently, and the white cloaks spread out like clouds. There were 3 soft swishing sounds, and then the clouds suddenly disappeared, and blood suddenly appeared. The 3 grassland cavalrymen still didn't even make a sound before they fell from their horses to the ground. Their eye sockets were pierced by arrows, and the liquid in their eyeballs mixed with blood flowed down. The 3 arrows were still the standard arrows most commonly used by the Tang army. What was even more shocking and frightening was that when these 3 duo or cavalry were killed, they were closer to the gates than the second duo or cavalry. More accurately, when they charged out of the gates, they were killed by the arrows. That arrow, where did it come from? Still, no one could see where the arrow came from, because the arrow was too fast. How could an ordinary arrow be shot so far? How could he shoot so fast? Speed and distance depended on the bow and the archer's strength, but what about accuracy? The duo or cavalry was fully armored, with only their eyes exposed. Moreover, they were galloping at high speeds, which made it even harder to hit them. Yet, that person was able to hit them from such a distance. Who on earth was that archer? From the north to the south of the grassland, the Golden Palace, the Northern Battlefront Army, and the horse gang by the Shibi Lake, there were countless geniuses who were good at riding and shooting. Yet, none of them could do it. The entire city of Wei fell into absolute silence again. Some people had vaguely guessed where the arrow came from. Not where it came from, but who it came from. For example, the nation master, Lebu Enada. To be able to kill elite cavalrymen with wooden arrows over such a long distance, he must have unimaginable strength. He must be one of the most powerful cultivators in the world. When people talked about a truly powerful archer, they would usually think of General Xiahou. After Xiahou was killed, there was only one person left, and that was the one who killed Xiahou. Not everyone could not see where the arrow came from. At least, the Tang soldiers around the place where the arrow came from could see it clearly. In an inconspicuous fort in the far north of the Tang camp, there was a fence that was built last night. There was someone standing behind the fence, and something that looked like a short fence. A dozen Tang soldiers looked at that person, too shocked to speak. They did not know what to do at this moment. Only then did someone wake up and hurried to report to his superior. That person was wearing an ordinary Tang uniform, just like any other Tang soldier. He held an unusual iron bow in his hand. The body of the bow was dark, with complicated talisman lines engraved on it. The iron bow seemed to have some kind of magic power. The short fence next to the person was not a real fence, but a dense array of arrows. At least 1,000 arrows were stuck tightly in the soil, squeezed together, and looked like a fence. Hoofbeats sounded again in the city of Wei. No one knew how many Duor cavalry were trying to rush out of the city gate. That person took out an arrow from the forest of arrows beside him, placed it on the string, and pulled the bow in silence. When the iron bow was half drawn, he loosened his fingers, and the string returned to its original position. With a swoosh, the arrow flew away. A muffled groan came from the city of Wei in the distance, followed by the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground. At this moment, that person had already taken out a second arrow from the ground and repeated the previous action. Another muffled groan, and the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground came from the city of Wei's gate. Another cavalry was shot down. All the trained Tang soldiers knew that shooting an arrow was actually a breakdown of several actions, starting from the pulling of the arrow and ending with the release of the string. The people watching from the side in shock did not think that there was anything special about that person's action. It was even simpler and more mechanical than the archery actions commonly seen in the Tang camp. Because it was simple and mechanical, it was not tall and straight, not to mention elegant. But that person's arrow was fast, so fast that it was beyond the scope of human imagination. In the direction of the city of Wei, the Duor cavalry's charge was no longer as slow as before. But that person did not act like in some legends. From the first arrow to the sixth arrow, the surrounding Tang soldiers did not blink. It was not because they were too shocked to blink, but because they did not have time to blink. In the blink of an eye, 6 arrows pierced through the air. Logically speaking, these Tang soldiers should not have been able to see the archer's movements. But they could, because the archer's movements were so accurate and steady that it was hard to imagine. There was no change in the repetitive movements. His fingers were always in the same position on the bowstring. Even the sleeves on his forearms did not tremble. The 6 repeated actions were the overlapping shadows in the morning wind. When combined together, it could be seen clearly. But there were shadows. More arrows left the ground, were placed on the bowstrings and pierced through the air. The grassland cavalry that rushed out of the city fell to the ground, and then smashed into the ground, creating small blossoms of blood. The cavalry did not stop charging, and the arrows did not stop shooting, not stopping at all. In the end, the cavalry charged out of the city gate so fast that even that person could not aim. So he stopped aiming and just shot with his elbows and wrists. The sharp arrows crossed a long distance and came to the front of the city of Wei. They fell on the grassland cavalry, the war horses, and the tough leather armor. But they broke through the armor. The moment the arrows touched the surface of the leather armor, they had completed their mission. The shafts were twisted into pieces by the huge force, but they still pushed the sharp arrowheads to their final destination. That was deep inside the flesh of the cavalry or their mounts. Looking at the figure of that person behind the fence, the Tang soldiers' eyes became more and more respectful. Everything that happened was so unbelievable. How terrifying the power of those arrows were. What was that person's body made of? How could he shoot so many powerful arrows in a row? Even the martial arts masters in the army had to rest after shooting dozens of arrows. Otherwise, their muscles would definitely be seriously injured. But that man had already shot more than 100 arrows. But his expression did not change. His body was as still as a mountain, not to mention that his breathing had become rapid. Even his chest did not seem to rise or fall. Suddenly, urgent bugles sounded around the Tang camp. Hundreds of Duoer cavalry went around the city wall and tried to occupy the higher ground of the meadow, and then charged towards the Tang camp. But that person ignored them and only stared at the city gate. The Duoer cavalry that was hiding in the city finally grasped the rhythm of the arrows. They found an opportunity and opened the city gate completely. Then, dozens of cavalry that were the best at riding rushed out at the same time. Dozens of Duoer cavalry rushed out of the city gate, like countless clouds of fog rushing out of the gate between two mountains. At this moment, no matter how amazing that person's archery was, he could not kill dozens of cavalry at the same time. Not to mention that there were hundreds or even thousands of cavalry behind him, waiting to continue the charge. The Tang camp's shouts became more and more urgent, and 6,000 cavalry mounted their horses, ready to counterattack. If the mysterious and terrifying arrows could not protect the front of the central military camp, then they could only rely on the cavalry themselves. But that person did not give the Tang cavalry a chance to fight. He continued shooting arrows in silence. Facing the grassland cavalry that rushed out of the city gate like a cloud of fog, he shot an arrow. He only shot one arrow. Unlike before, this arrow was not pulled out from the grass beside him, but from the quiver on his back. That arrow was obviously different. The arrowhead was a round cylinder. A shrill whistle sounded in the morning sky. Under everyone's gaze, the arrow flew in an arc and landed in front of the city of Wei. There was a moment of silence. Then, boom! A loud bang sounded in front of the city of Wei, raising a lot of soil, as if it was going to tear open the sky. Among the flying soil, there were the broken limbs of horses and cavalrymen, and even some heads flying in the air. The city of Wei's gate collapsed. The soil and bricks in the soil rustled down, crushing countless injured Duoer cavalry. Muffled groans and cries of pain could be faintly heard in the dust. Another arrow came from the south. This time, the sound of the arrow was clearer than before, not like a breeze, but like a hurricane, whistling mournfully. The whistling of the arrow sounded continuously. Hundreds of arrows, as if there was no break, passed through the morning wind, passed through the dust, and shot into the depths. A grassland cavalry jumped off his dead horse, pulled out his scimitar, and looked around anxiously, but did not know where the enemy was. Suddenly an arrow came from the south, and pierced through his chest. A grassland cavalryman crawled up with blood all over his body, and walked out of the smoke and dust. He kept shouting something, appearing particularly ruthless. Suddenly, an arrow was shot into his mouth, and came out from the back of his head, bringing with it a flower of blood. A grassland cavalry fell to the ground, waved his scimitar, and killed his horse, which was still kicking after being shot. He struggled to stand up, eyes full of fear, and then he saw an arrow flying towards his fear. Puff, 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 puff. The arrow hit the leather armor, the eyes, the throat, and other different places, but made a very similar sound, which was the sound of something piercing. Those arrows seemed to have magic power, and could pierce through everything. In the dust in front of the city of Wei, there were deaths everywhere. The sound of arrows and muffled groans, which represented death, rang incessantly. After an unknown period of time, the dust finally settled, and the morning sun fell again, falling in front of the city of Wei, plated with a layer of red light. The morning sun finally peeked out of the grassland, red as if it was stained with blood. The morning sun was like blood, and the front of the city was covered in blood. At this time, the people inside and outside the city had already confirmed where the arrows came from. Everyone looked at the Tang camp, at the fence. Until now, not a single grassland cavalry could rush to the Tang camp. In fact, except for the first 3 cavalrymen, no one could rush out of the city of Wei. It was a mess in front of the city of Wei, with the corpses of the cavalrymen and war horses piled up into a small hill. Fresh blood flowed down from the small mountain like countless tiny waterfalls. Back then, in front of the verdant canyon, Junemo blocked with his sword, and no one could pass. After Junemo lost his arm, No one thought that such a scene would appear again. Who would have thought that the scene in the city of Wei would appear again today? But in reverse. Today, with one arrow in the south, no one could come out. That person, with an iron bow and a ground full of arrows, had sealed the Golden Tribe Royal Court's most powerful cavalry in the city of Wei. At the same time the explosion occurred at the city gates, the hundreds of duo or cavalry that were charging towards the Tang camp from both sides also suffered a crushing blow. The crossbow battalion that had been hiding at the side all this while released their long-prepared rage and concentrated crossbow arrows at the same time. There was a buzzing sound on the grassland. It was the sound of zither, as if countless zither were playing the same tune. After a while, when the sound disappeared, tens of thousands of crossbow arrows fell at the same time, like a rainstorm. The royal court had designed the route of their charge to pass through the city, because this was the shortest distance and the shortest time. However, no one expected that this route would be so dangerous. The attack from the two sides needed to go around the city, so it was not direct enough to break through Su Qi's rain of crossbow arrows. Therefore, the real turning point of the battle was still the middle route, and it depended on whether the duo or cavalry could rush out of the city gate. Only by rushing out of the city gate could there be a possibility of continuing the charge, and all the subsequent plans could be carried out. If they could not even rush out of the city gate, how could they talk about anything else? Behind the mountain of corpses that was dripping with blood at the city gate, the angry and violent curses of the nobles of the royal court could be vaguely heard, along with the merciless orders and hurried footsteps. No one knew how many people were rushing over, hoping to clear the mountain of corpses from the city gate in the shortest time possible, so as to make way for the cavalry behind. As for whether the iron hooks and ropes would hurt the bodies of the tribal warriors in the process, it was no longer within the grassland people's consideration. The desire to live had overwhelmed everything else. However, for the last warriors of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, today was destined to be a day of despair. The Tangs did not give them any chance, not even a chance to move the bodies of their compatriots. Inside and outside the city of Wei, there was suddenly a brief moment of silence. The sky that was dyed red by the rising sun suddenly revealed its original azure color. The wild flowers that were gently swayed by the wind on the field suddenly stopped moving, and the air that wrapped the fragile petals suddenly became countless times more viscous. The grassland warhorses in the city, and the warhorses in the Tang camp outside the city all looked up at the sky at the same time, becoming a little anxious and restless, but too afraid to neigh to vent their emotions. The aura of heaven and earth was undergoing a drastic change. The heaven and earth that human eyes could see did not change at all. It was even more tranquil and beautiful than before. In the silence, suddenly there were countless hissing sounds, and then a horrible scene appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The mountain of corpses of the cavalrymen and warhorses in front of the city of Wei collapsed. He watched as his building collapsed. When the building collapsed, it must have disintegrated, starting from the eaves and beams of the building. The mountain of corpses also began to disintegrate from the inside. The tough leather armor and the strong body of the warhorse instantly disintegrated, turning into countless pieces of flesh and blood. The thin waterfall formed by the blood became much thicker, and then everything fell apart. In the middle of the mountain of corpses in front of the city of Wei, there was a huge gap, about 2 feet wide. Apart from blood and flesh soaking in the bloody water, there was nothing else in the wound. The streets of the city could be seen at a glance. People standing in the city could also clearly see the scenery outside the city. But at this moment, there was no one left standing in the city of Wei. The streets were filled with fallen yellow soil and accumulated dust. The wind was howling incessantly. The peasants and slaves who were carrying the bodies of the cavalrymen, and the hundreds of Duor cavalry, who were standing in the middle of the street ready to charge at the Tang camp, all disappeared. Just like the bodies of the cavalrymen in the gap of the mountain of corpses. These lives, which were still alive a moment ago, had now become formless chunks of flesh and blood. The street became the coldest and most terrifying charaba in the Buddhism sect. There was nothing left except death. This was a tunnel of death. This was an arrow path. The arrow path extended from the south to the north of the city, breaking a mud wall in the north of the city. Dozens of carriages on the wall emitted clear light, protecting themselves. The corners of the carriages were damaged, revealing something pale inside, which looked like human bones. The National Master looked to the south, his face pale. The people who were affected by the arrow path fled in all directions, bleeding, avoiding the second attack that did not happen. There were panicked shouts everywhere, only quieting down after a long time. The people hid behind the wheels, behind the uneasy horses, following the National Master's gaze to the south. Their faces were full of fear, and their eyes were even showing signs of losing focus. At this moment, a straight Lung Ning Yun slowly appeared in the sky above the streets of the city of Wei. Some people had already guessed who the person who shot the arrow was. Now that the famous Lung Ning Yun appeared in front of them, their guesses were confirmed. In an instant, thousands of people died. Half of them were duo cavalry who were ready to charge. This was not a massacre, but it was more terrifying. Facing such an unimaginable scene, facing an enemy beyond imagination, the grassland people could not even be angry, only fear and despair. Even the bravest man in the tribe lost all confidence at this moment. Scattered sounds of hooves came from the south gate of the city of Wei. The smoke and dust from the gap in the mountain of corpses gradually settled. A man walked in from there. An old horse was dragging an old cart behind him. The cart was filled to the brim with arrows. The man carried a quiver on his back, and an iron bow on his shoulder. The man's clothes were mottled by the blood and dust that fell from the sky. He was wearing an ordinary Tang military uniform. He looked like an ordinary soldier of the Tang army. He was just an ordinary soldier of the Tang. Many years ago, he was a soldier in the city of Wei. After many years, he finally returned to the city. He was a wanderer who returned to his hometown at the border village. He was a veteran who dreamed of the Horn Battalion. He was covered with dust and unstoppable. I don't want to write words of reminiscence. Please vote for me. Thank you. Chapter 1092. The final battle between the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe began on a spring morning. From the beginning to the end, Su Qi's central tent only paid the price of tens of thousands of crossbow bolts. They did not have to do anything else, and over 1,000 of the most elite duo cavalry died in the hands of one person. They died to that person's arrows. Chan Yu rode on horseback and looked in the direction of the city of Wei behind him. He looked terrible. After the headmaster of the academy ascended to heaven, the unwritten rules in the cultivation world were all erased. Later, Lu Yiqing entered the palace alone and killed the emperor of the South Jin Kingdom. This represented the emergence of a new world and new rules. With the spring wind and rain, the form of war began to undergo unimaginable drastic changes. The few powerhouses might not be able to decide the direction of the human world, but they were starting to have the right to decide the outcome of a war, such as the one in the city of Wei today. In the past, such a change was described by the dead Lu Yiqing, the domineering Hengmu Liren in Qinghe Prefecture, or Junemo in front of the verdant canyon. But it was not until Ning Ke appeared in the city of Wei that everyone, including Chan Yu, realized that he was the only one who could represent the change of the form of war. Ning Ke was the one who could change the course of a battle to the greatest extent. It was because he had the ability, because he had the means, because he had the thoughts and the absolute will. Come to think of it, ever since he started cultivating, any changes he made to his cultivation methods and weapons could eventually be used on the battlefield. They could all be used to cause the greatest amount of damage. Even Yi Hongyu was not as good as him in this aspect. Perhaps it was because among the most powerful powerhouses in the cultivation world, he was the only one who started from the most common soldier. He was the only one who understood the battlefield the best. Therefore, he should be the one to change the war. In the field to the north of the city of Wei, the sound of retreat had already been heard. The sound of galloping horses could be heard everywhere. The remaining 8,000 duo cavalry were escorting Chan Yu to the depths of the grassland. The Golden Tribe royal court still had many cavalrymen, and seemed to be able to fight again. But the duo or cavalry's morale had been severely damaged. They would never be able to enter the same rhythm again. That was a sure defeat. Chanyu's idea of gambling, or risking his life, was crushed before it could be implemented. He was defeated before the fight even started, which made him feel real despair. The crossbow battalion was not scary. Even if Su Qi used the crossbow battalion to seal the gate of the city of Wei, it would be meaningless. In fact, he purposely left this opportunity for the Tangs. He believed that his cavalrymen could withstand the terrifying rain of crossbows and turn the pain and death into courage bestowed by the Tungri heaven. He did not expect that the duo or cavalry, who could defend against the rain of arrows, who could ignore death, would not be able to charge through that person's arrows. Their courage was numbed by the shock. That person seemed to be scarier than death. But so what if they left the city of Wei? According to the calculation of the high priest and the wise men, the Tang army would not give them too much time. The seemingly green and pleasant grassland, the incomparably familiar environment, could only become the graveyard of the palace's cavalrymen. Even if they returned to their hometown in the depths of the grassland, how many of them could survive? Chanyu looked at the road to the north with a pale face. He thought of the loyal warriors left in the city of Wei, and the national master, and high priests in the south. He felt an extreme pain in his chest. The Golden Tribe Royal Court was destroyed by Ning Kei's arrows before they could launch their final attack. Although it was hopeless to retreat, it was an inevitable choice. However, if they did not want to be chased by the Tang army, or to be harassed or even destroyed by Ning Kei's horrifying tactics, someone had to stop him. More than 2,000 elite cavalrymen were left inside and outside the city of Wei, ready to sacrifice their lives to slow down the pursuit of Su Qi's 6,000 cavalrymen. As for the cavalrymen in Kaiping and Chu City, they could only be wiped out one by one in despair. Naturally, the Golden Tribe Royal Court also left someone to stop Ning Quebec. There was no one else. It could not be anyone else. It could only be a de Ning Kei walked on the streets of the city of Wei. His military boots stepped on the powdery organs and blood, making a paw-paw sound. Sometimes it felt like a young girl's bare feet stepping on a barrel of grape wine. He walked out of the southern part of the blood-soaked road and got closer to the flag of the Golden Tribe. He was about to take a step forward when he suddenly retracted his right foot and landed on the ground. He then looked to the side of the road. He alone had scared off the entire Golden Tribe Royal Court. Throughout history, such a thing had rarely happened. 1,000 years ago, the headmaster of the academy alone had scared off the entire West Hill Divine Palace. Of course he was more arrogant and powerful, but what Ning Kei had done was already very impressive. However, he could not scare off the person by the side of the road. A young man from the grassland was standing by the side of the road. The young man had been sitting in an abandoned restaurant by the side of the road for a whole night, waiting for Ning Kei's arrival. Because of this, he did not face the horrifying iron arrow directly. No one knew whether it was the young man's luck or the duo or cavalry's misfortune. I can't stop that iron arrow, but it can't kill me either. The young man from the grassland looked at Ning Kei and said calmly, "And now you are too close to me. I can see your movements clearly, so it's even more impossible for you to kill me with an iron arrow. Let's try another way." Besides the iron bow, Ning Kei also had a cutlass on his shoulder, that heavy, dark and sharp iron cutlass. But it was obvious that he had no intention of pulling it out. He just looked at the young man quietly. He knew that the young man was a Da. He was the most powerful close combat powerhouse in the Golden Tribe Royal Court. He had long replaced General Lebya's position. It was said that he was the last disciple of the National Master. But his real combat power might not be weaker than the National Master. The young man might even be the most powerful human on the grassland. But just 2 years ago, he was just a poor slave. He was thin, bullied and could die at any time. What changed everything was that spring breeze that turned into light rain. Ning Kei subconsciously looked up at the blue sky, and then shook his head. According to his usual temperament, he had no interest in talking to this young powerhouse called a Da. Just like what Yi Hongyu once said, since they were going to fight, why talk so much nonsense? In the end, it all depended on who would die and who would live. But because of that spring breeze and rain, he was suddenly curious about this young man. Who named you? Ning Ke asked. Ada said, I named it myself. Ning Ke asked, why did you name yourself? In the words of you people from the Central Plains, Ada means very good at fighting. Ning Ke smiled and said, I have stayed here for many years. My grassland barbarian language is better than yours. I know that Ada means cheap. Da means bone. You are a cheap bone. Hearing this, Ada's face turned gloomy. The National Master asked you to stay and stop me, which means he asked you to die. Ning Ke ignored his expression and said, get out of my way. For her sake, I will leave your body intact. Ada didn't know who he was talking about. He just felt angry, because obviously, Mr. 13 of the Academy did not see him as a real opponent. Why? He had always thought that he respected the Academy. Yes, he had always wanted to kill his way to Chang, and then kill all those strange people in the back of the mountain of the Academy. But he thought it represented his respect. Why did Ning Ke have such an attitude? I admit that you are powerful. Ada looked at the blood-stained long street, and the iron bow on Ning Ke's shoulder. He sneered and said, but you don't know how powerful I am. What right do you have to look down on me when you can't use the iron arrow? He was angry, but he was smiling. He wanted to express his contempt in this way. No matter how high Ning Ke's state of cultivation was, he was only at the upper state of knowing destiny. Now that the primordial 13 arrows had lost their greatest power, he did not think that his opponent was his opponent. The task given to him by Chanyu and the National Master was to stop Ning Ke, slow him down when he passed the city of Wei, and then wait for a chance to leave. He agreed in silence, but he was thinking about something else. He was the gift from Tungri to the grassland. He was the only embodiment of the vast and mighty will. How could he lose to a human like Ning Ke? He wanted to defeat him fair and square. Ning Ke had stopped smiling. He looked at him quietly and said, then you shall die. Ada squinted his eyes, and a cruel expression appeared on his young and dark face. He took a deep breath, and his chest rose like a mountain rising from the grassland. In just a breath, half of the air on the streets of the city of Wei was inhaled into his body. At the same time, there seemed to be endless qi of heaven and earth pouring into his body. His physique was completely changed by the spring wind and rain. He was very close to the qi of heaven and earth on the grassland. He could breathe in the qi of heaven and earth at a speed that other cultivators could not imagine. What did it mean? It meant that he had an inexhaustible power. After he became the National Master's disciple, he even learned the cultivation method of the Enlightenment doctrine. The National Master was knowledgeable and well-versed in 3 arts. Besides, he was a good friend of Xiong Chumo, so it was not surprising that he had such a method. In other words, Ada had been possessed by the devil. His body was harder than a real stone, and his life was more tenacious than a real stone. With the blessing of Tengri, he felt that he should be invincible. Yes, he was afraid of Ning Ke's iron arrow. But after seeing the iron arrow today, he still felt that he could try to take it head-on. It was not hard to imagine his strong confidence. As Ada breathed, the qi of heaven and earth was in chaos. A gust of wind blew in the city of Wei. He looked at Ning Ke as if he was looking at a dead man. He wanted to do what Chanyu and the National Master did not expect him to do. He wanted to save the fate of the royal court. He wanted to be the new sun on the grassland and shine on the entire human world. That was why he had remained silent in this war, watching everything happen quietly. Only now did he walk onto the street and block Ning Ke's path, ready to kill him. Everyone inside and outside of the city of Wei felt the drastic change of the qi of heaven and earth. Ordinary people could not see the change of the qi of heaven and earth, but they could see the strange phenomenon. A dark cloud suddenly floated over the city of Wei and blocked all the sunlight. Powerhouses like the National Master and Su Qi could clearly sense that the qi of heaven and earth was rushing towards somewhere. The horrifying power that Ada displayed made the two of them have completely different feelings. The wind blew on the street, The remaining half of the signboard of the tavern was blown to the mud wall, making a muffled sound. The yellow soil on the wall was peeled off. At this moment, Ninkei suddenly said something. You know what? I used to buy many jars of wine and roasted chicken in this tavern. I won a lot of money, took a lot of people's underwear, and rejected many marriage offers. Take a break. Tomorrow I will beat Ada to death. Ada. This name came from a police story. I wish everyone a happy weekend and a successful blind date. Don't talk about marriage with Sang Sang. Chapter 1093. Ninkei looked at the street. The buildings on both sides of the street were still the same as when he was here years ago. They were all made of yellow soil. After being blown by the wind for a long time, they became soft and turned into yellow sand. Back then, he was playing lewd dangling fist with someone in the inn. Sang Sang was the judge. The master and the servant won money together. Then they walked out of the inn. He walked with his hands behind his back, while Sang Sang followed behind him with the wine pot and roasted chicken. It was very strenuous. At that time, they were stepping on the yellow sand. After so many years, the inn was ruined, the old friends were gone, and the yellow sand had turned into blood. What Ninkei was stepping on now was the blood of his enemies, but also the blood of many old friends. It was inevitable that he missed it. At this moment, it was not the time to reminisce about the past. No matter who saw it, the timing of this sentence was very inexplicable. It was very incongruous with the current atmosphere of the battle. As a result, Ada's face became extremely gloomy. He felt that Ninkei was humiliating him on purpose. He calmed himself down and breathed out the foul air. He stepped on the Taoist stone and struck forward with a punch. It was a very simple move. It could not even be considered as a move. However, in the simplicity, there was extreme power. Therefore, the speed was also extremely fast. A light explosion was heard on the street. That was the result of the air being squeezed away rapidly. Ada's fist was like an arrow, hitting in front of Ning Quebec. Just like what he said, he was very good at fighting. Such a simple punch was so majestic, with the unique roughness of the grassland. It actually had the feeling of Liu Bai's great river sword. If it were any other cultivator, they would probably choose to retreat when faced with such a fist, because the weakest part of a cultivator was their body. To fight against an enemy who cultivated the methods of the Enlightenment doctrine, absorbed the world into his body, and possessed immense strength, the first thing he had to do was to put some distance between himself and his opponent. But Ninkei did not retreat. Ada knew that Ninkei would not retreat. He knew that Ninkei had already joined the devil, and his body was equally strong. Ninkei had enough strength, no matter the strength or the strength of his body, to take this punch head-on. That was the moment that Ada was waiting for. He wanted to create an environment where he could fight head-on. Because he had countless backup plans and countless tough means, he needed a receiving surface to provide support. Just like those terrifying sandstorms in the grasslands at the turn of spring and summer, they weren't that scary when passing through the open plains. As long as one maintained a distance, one could even view those scenes as rare and beautiful scenery. However, when someone or something was in the middle of those sandstorms, and began to bear the power of the sandstorms, they would instantly be riddled with holes and broken beyond repair. Ada's fist and his cultivation method was the sandstorm. As long as Ninkei did not retreat, as long as Ninkei took it head-on, the sandstorm would devour him. However, to his surprise, Ninkei did not choose to dodge or retreat, nor did he use the Devil's Doctrine's methods to block it. From the front, it seemed that he did not do anything. There was no expression on Ninkei's face. The iron bow was still on his shoulder, and the iron cutlass was still on his back. He even had his hands behind his back. It seemed that he did not care about the fist that was about to hit him. No one could really ignore it. That fist belonged to Ada, carrying the divine power left by Haotian on the grassland. In fact, Ninkei had already made his own response, but Ada did not see it. His hands that were behind his back were spread out. His right hand quickly wrote a word in the air. When he finished writing the word, his face turned pale. At the same time, an unimaginably vigorous psyche power was emitted from his body, and spread to the heaven and earth. The chi of heaven and earth in the city of Wei was pouring into Ada's body. All of a sudden it became stagnant. After a moment, the chi of heaven and earth seemed to have heard some order, and began to condense into a shape. The violent sandstorm passed through the street, and blurred everyone's sight. Ninkei wrote a word. That word was a talisman. The sandstorm did come. But it was not caused by Ada. It was caused by him. Countless yellow sand flew up from the ground, the walls, and the tables and chairs that no one cared about in the inn. It came to the street at an unimaginable speed, and came to the front of Ada's fist. A wisp of yellow sand was a tie. There was an amazing amount of chi of heaven and earth in it. Hundreds of wisps of yellow sand rose from the streets and buildings of the city of Wei. Following Ninkei's order, they fell on Ada's fist and became a tie. It was as if his fist was wrapped with countless layers of gauze. Old pus-stained yellow gauze. Ninkei used the bind talisman. The yellow sand in the city of Wei was his talisman. Ada instantly felt that his fist had smashed into a piece of desert. The desert was bottomless, and there was a faint flow under it. The horrifying force was tearing his hand. He was not afraid of the tearing pain. Instead, he became more clear-headed. He growled and loosened his fist. His 5 fingers were like 5 machetes. With the unparalleled strength, he directly cut through the countless layers of yellow sand on his fist. Ninkei looked at the yellow sand gradually breaking. He raised his right hand and wrote several strokes. Obviously, his word was very simple. Ada's first punch had ended. He forcibly broke free from the bind talisman and regained his freedom. The first thing he did was to take a heavy step forward. He stepped on the ground. With the power of heaven and earth, he raised his fist again. It was still a simple punch. It was aimed at Ninkei's face. What he pursued was very simple. What he wanted was also very simple. He did not expect that this punch could defeat Ning Quebec. He did not even think that it could hurt Ning Quebec. He only hoped that Ninkei could take it. As long as Ninkei chose to take it, he would have a way. Ninkei still did not take it. What took the second punch from Ada was the second talisman he wrote. When he wrote this talisman, he was not looking at Ada's fist, but the streets of the city of Wei. The city of Wei was a military stronghold. It was a real small city. It could only accommodate a few people. There were not many buildings either. There were only 4 main streets, 2 in both horizontal and vertical directions. If one looked down from the sky, the main street of the city of Wei formed a character. Jing, it was a coincidence. The most powerful talisman of Master Yin Sei was the Jing talisman. The first talisman that Ninkei learned was also the Jing talisman. It was also a coincidence. Ninkei looked at the streets of the city of Wei and wrote the very simple Jing talisman. This talisman had once cut the space on the nameless mountain in the north of Chang'an. It turned the infinite light summoned by Elder Wei Guangming into fragments in the mirror. It could be imagined how powerful this Jing talisman was. Ada's soul was cleansed by the spring rain. He was extremely sensitive to the changes of the chi of heaven and earth. Although he did not know talisman Taoism, he instantly felt the changes of the heaven and earth. His face changed dramatically. Facing such a horrible and sharp talisman, he did not dare to continue punching. A roar resounded through the street. He took a step back with great difficulty. He crushed the street in front of the tavern and returned all the accumulated strength to the earth. Only then he could take back his fists and cover his face with them. Ninkei today might be slightly different from his master Yin Sei in the understanding of talisman Taoism. But when it came to the depth of cultivation of talisman Taoism, they had already reached the same place. Even a powerhouse like Wei Guangming had to surpass the 5 states to block this Jing talisman. Although Ada's cultivation state of Devil's Doctrine was equal to the peak of the 5 states, he could only seek for self-preservation. Self-preservation, he could only use his own body to protect his life. At this moment in the city of Wei, nothing was more trustworthy and more powerful than his own body. The wind was blowing wildly on the long street. Yellow sand filled the sky. Ada's figure was about to be swallowed up. It seemed that he would fall at any time, but he did not fall. His fists actually blocked most of the talisman. No wonder he was the gift from Haotian to the grassland. His body strength had indeed exceeded the scope of ordinary powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine. After a long time, the talisman and the infinite chi of heaven and earth summoned by the Jing talisman finally dissipated in the heaven and earth. The yellow sand gradually fell, and the wind was gone. Ada slowly loosened his fists and looked at Ning Ke again. His body was covered with terrifying wounds, and countless amounts of blood flowed out like a waterfall. His two toughest fists were already bony, and it was a terrifying sight to behold. The most important thing was that the bone necklace hanging around his neck had already turned into powder. His proudest and most confident body was broken. His last life-saving item had already been blown away by the wind. But he was still alive. As long as he was alive, he could win. I thought you had already lost the courage to fight and the ability to kill after being imprisoned in Chang, and for so many years. I never thought that you still have so many skills. It seems that I have underestimated the academy after all. Ada stared at Ning Quebec. The childishness on his face had already been smeared by the blood. His eyes were emitting cold light like a wolf and endless killing intent. Unfortunately, you still can't kill me. Although I don't know how you saw through my cultivation method and refused to take my fists, but I want to know more. Such a powerful talisman couldn't kill me. Besides taking my fists, what else can you do? Ada looked very miserable at this moment, but his tone was like a real winner. He looked at Ning Ke without hiding his killing intent and contempt, as if he was looking at an old beast that was about to die. Ning Ke looked at him calmly and said, I can still kill you. Ada grinned with a cruel smile and said, This human world might have belonged to you people before, but it will belong to us in the end, because we are younger. After saying this, he raised his fist again. His fist was bleeding. Under the gloomy clouds, the ghastly white bones looked especially terrifying. He gathered all his strength into this fist. Ning Ke stretched out his right hand and wrote another character on the street of the city of Wei. This character was even simpler than the character of Jing. It only had half of the strokes. Half of the character of Jing could only be 2. He wrote a talisman of 2. 2 unimaginably powerful talisman intents suddenly shrouded the entire city of Wei. It even spread outside the city of Wei. The remaining half of the signboard of the tavern suddenly swung to the middle of the street and hung in the air, looking like a knife. A hole suddenly appeared in the wall of a small courtyard. A hunting knife that had been hidden for many years stretched out half of its body from the hole, as if it wanted to see this strange world again. Those grassland cavalries that were retreating outside the city of Wei suddenly found that their cutlasses started to collide in the sheath, and wanted to leave. And the Tang army, that was preparing to chase, found that they wanted to draw out their swords to kill the enemy. The 2 talisman intents were both knife intents. Ada's face turned extremely ugly, because he smelled the scent of death. He never thought that Ning Ke had more powerful means. And he never thought that he couldn't even tell whether it was talisman intents or knife intents. He let out an angry and unwilling roar, and was forced to withdraw his fist again. He burst out the chi of heaven and earth stored in his body, and retreated to the back of the street, hoping to get out of the range of the 2 talisman intents. However, Ning Ke's 2 talisman had already shrouded the entire city of Wei. How could he escape? The strong wind blew again. Ada let out a painful and frustrated cry. His clothes were torn into pieces, and then his skin started to tear. The blood that had just stopped gushing out of his body again. He stopped retreating and covered his face with his fists, struggling to hold on in the strong wind. Finally, Ning Ke moved and rushed forward. Outside the city of Wei, the national master looked at the black wind that rolled like a dragon under the gloomy clouds. He looked at the sand there, and sensed the sharp talisman intents there. His expression didn't change, but his eyes revealed deep worry and vigilance. Looking at the strange sky, those grassland cavalries looked even more terrible. Suddenly, people heard a thunder in the city of Wei, and then there were countless thunders. The national master withdrew his gaze and sat back in the carriage. The wind calmed down and the sand fell. The black cloud also disappeared. The sunlight fell on the streets and buildings of the city of Wei again. The blue sky returned to people's sight. It was peaceful and pleasant. There was a pit on the straightest and longest street in the city of Wei. Ada was lying at the bottom of the pit, covered with blood and bones sticking out of his body. He was dying and looked extremely miserable. If it wasn't for Hao Yan's blessing, he would have died long ago. Ning Ke slowly straightened his body. His chest rose and fell slightly, his right hand trembled slightly, and his face was slightly pale. But his expression was as calm as before, as if he didn't throw out 300 punches in a few seconds. The continuous thunder that everyone outside the city heard was the sound of his punches landing on Ada's body. His face was a little pale. It had nothing to do with the consumption of energy, but because he had written 3 divine talismans in a row. Even with his extremely vigorous psyche power, he still felt a little tired. Ada coughed painfully. Blood spilled out from the corner of his mouth. He turned his head with difficulty and looked at Ning Quebec. His eyes were full of confusion and fear. Maybe it was to cover up this emotion. It turned into some kind of contempt at last. He was very unwilling, because he still had many tricks that he hadn't used. So he used his eyes to mock Ning Quebec. In the end, you still don't dare to take my punches. Ning Ke didn't say anything. It was not that he didn't dare to take the punches of this grassland lad, but he didn't need to. He didn't care to take it. Just like now, it was not that he couldn't explain, but he didn't want to. What he wanted to explain was another matter. You said you were good at fighting, so I beat you to death. He looked at Ada, who was about to die, and said, I know it's cruel, but you barbarians don't have the word cruel. So it doesn't matter. I just want your people who are still alive to be more afraid. Yes, many people were scared at this moment, so scared that they were trembling all over. The grassland cavalries outside the city were trembling and whipping their horses with all their might. They wanted to escape as fast and as far as possible. Even the well-disciplined duo or cavalry formation was a little messed up. The grassland cavalries in the city were trembling and didn't dare to move. The thunder-like sound of punches landing on bodies in the sandstorm had already made them let go of the reins and cover their ears in fear. No one would have thought that the battle would end like this. In the hearts of the grassland cavalries, Ada was a gift from the immortal heaven to the grassland. He was an undefeated warrior. How could he be beaten like a dog by the Tang army? The national master and Chanyu were clear about the power of the academy. They didn't think that Ada could defeat Ning Ke, but they thought that he could hold his opponent for a while, and even find a chance to escape. Who would have thought that Ning Ke could win so easily and naturally? Ada himself had said before that Ning Ke's iron arrow had lost its greatest power. So what else could he do? He was indeed very strong, but he had forgotten one very important thing. He only remembered that Ning Ke's iron arrow could shock the world, and he only remembered that Ning Ke joined the devil. But he forgot that after Ning Ke started cultivation, he didn't cultivate sword, devil or psyche power but talisman. Ning Ke's real identity had always been a talisman master. He was now a divine talisman master. Since the right to light in the Peach Mountain, he hadn't used talisman for a long time. So many people had forgotten his identity. But he was a divine talisman master, one of the 2 most powerful divine talisman masters in the world after Yensei and the master of calligrapher. A talisman master was invincible in the same state. A divine talisman master could be invincible under the 5 states, unless he met a real genius like Liu Bai, Junemo, and Yi Su who didn't follow the normal rules. A real genius had nothing to do with heaven. Talent was not given by heaven, but obtained by oneself through hard cultivation, peerless talent and supreme willpower. Once it was obtained, it couldn't be lost. Ada's cultivation talent and everything he had were given by Hao Tian. So he wasn't a real genius. Then as long as he was still within the 5 states, even if he had mastered the devil's doctrines art in just 1 year, and reached the peak of the 5 states, according to the standard of the cultivation world, he still couldn't be a match for a divine talisman master. Ada didn't know if he finally understood something before he died. His eyes quickly dimmed. There was unwillingness, sadness, anger and despair in the depth of the dimness. Because in this battle, the gap between him and Ning Ke was too big. So big that it couldn't be narrowed. It was so big that it made him feel hopeless. Even if he had to fight again, he couldn't see any possibility of winning. Why? The final radiance of the setting sun before his death allowed him to speak. He blankly looked at the blue sky and murmured, "Why? Why?" At the last moment, the problem that still troubled this grassland lad and made his soul unable to rest had nothing to do with the state of cultivation. It was only related to faith. Ado was very proud and confident because he firmly believed that he was a gift from Hautian to the grassland. He firmly believed that his strength had its own reasons and he would never fail. Wouldn't his failure mean the failure of Hautian? This was something that could not possibly happen. However, in front of this man, this matter just happened as it should. What was going on? "This is my city." Ningke looked at him and said, "I left Chang'an, but this is still my city. No one can defeat me in Chang'an, and no one can defeat me here." Ado shook his head painfully and said while gasping, "But Tungri, it's said that you and Hungmu are her gifts to the human world. Although she has always been in charge of the money at home, she didn't ask for my permission before she gave you these gifts." Ningke was silent for a moment and then said, "Since she is not here now, I think it's reasonable for me to take back these gifts. I think she would be too embarrassed to object." It was not until now that Ado realized who was the she. That Ningke said before the battle that he would leave his body intact for the sake of her. His eyes became extremely confused, and then he started to cry silently in despair and pain. In the end, he closed his eyes and couldn't see the sky anymore. "From now on, I will keep killing people at night. Please cast your monthly votes to help me kill. Thank you." Chapter 1094. Ado died. No matter whether he accepted the fact or not, he closed his eyes and left the world. It had been exactly 1 year since he became a powerhouse of the royal court from a slave. He was a young man from the grassland. He had a firm belief and a true love for his tribe. It was indeed cruel to destroy his belief before he died. Ningke was a cruel man. Ningke had always been a cruel person. He knew how cruel and bloodthirsty this grassland lad was when he killed the Tangs. But he was not a perverted person who would destroy his enemy's faith before his death to gain some kind of pleasure. He inherited Lotus Mantle, but he was not Lotus. The reason why he said those words to Ado at the last moment was that he always insisted on a principle. A man could live a muddled life, but he should die sober. He asked himself that, so he treated others the same way. And the time he said those words was also the time for him to adjust his chi circulation. Since he was free, he should do something meaningful. When Ado closed his eyes, he had finished adjusting his chi circulation. The raging waves in his sense of perception had calmed down. The crystal bead condensed by the Great Spirit in his lower abdomen was shining brightly. Everything was in order. He looked at the grassland in the north outside of the city of Wei. He bent his knees slightly, and the bluestone under his feet cracked inch by inch. An unimaginable power passed from his knees to the ground and back again. With a loud bang, he left the street and jumped to the blue sky. It was like jumping to the blue sea. He jumped very high and broke through the cool air. In an instant, he was far away from the ground, and was more than 1,000 feet high in the sky. Looking down from here, the city of Wei had become an inconspicuous mound, and the wilderness seemed to have become a big carpet. The flag of the Golden Tribe Royal Court could be seen faintly in the distance. But he did not know if Chanyu was there. On the wilderness, hundreds of clouds of dust were getting thicker and thicker. Each cloud of dust represented a grassland person who was running for their lives. They were running for their lives because they wanted to survive. Because he was high, he could see very far. He looked around, trying to see something, until the Tianchi Mountains became a black line in his sight. But he still did not see the person he wanted to see. He was not the headmaster of the academy, and could not truly fly freely. No matter how high he jumped, there would always be a moment when he would fall. However, he could choose the timing and direction of his fall. The next moment, he landed on the surface of the wilderness. His speed became faster and faster. The wind blew against his Tang uniform, making a crackling sound like an explosion. But he did not even squint his eyes. He had to stare at the place where he landed. As he got closer and closer to the ground, he could see the cavalry and carriages galloping across the plains clearly. He could even see the terrified expressions on the cavalry's faces and the wooden boxes on the carriages. Those carriages were his targets. The national master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court was in that carriage. As for Chan Yu and the last cavalryman of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, who had fled dozens of miles to the north, he did not care. What he needed to do now was to kill that mysterious and powerful imperial tutor. There was a deafening sound of air tearing in the sky above the wilderness. A person's figure fell from the blue sky like a meteorite. Behind him, there was a faint flame caused by the friction. However, because he fell too fast, he was completely left behind. The grassland warhorses were terrified and kept neighing. They ignored the whipping of their masters and spun around on the spot. The carriages stopped where they were. No matter how hard the drivers shouted, they could not move forward. There was a loud bang. One of the carriages was smashed and turned into dust. The carriages turned into countless splinters of wood that were as thick as fingers and shot out in all directions. The horses and cavalrymen, who were unable to escape immediately, had many wounds on their bodies. Miserable cries rang out incessantly, and the scene was extremely bloody. The dust gradually settled and Ning Kei's figure appeared in front of everyone. He looked at the national master in front of him and said, "It seems that you have long guessed that I would come." The national master of the Golden Tribe sat cross-legged on the ground in front of him. His old face looked calm. Ning Kei jumped down from the sky and crushed the entire carriage with one foot. But he did not kill him. Just when his foot crushed the carriage and came to the top of the national master's head, the national master suddenly disappeared from where he was and came to the other side of the carriage. When the entire carriage was destroyed, the national master sat on the plains. There were weeds and wildflowers everywhere on the plains, and they surrounded him. The national master did not pick any wildflowers. He just looked at one in front of him and said calmly, "I have been waiting for someone from the academy to jump down from the sky. I just did not expect that it would be you." Ning Kei looked around and looked at the seemingly scattered carriages. He felt a mysterious and strange aura gradually becoming stronger. The aura was filled with the primitive smell of blood. "This is what you've been preparing for." He looked back at the national master in front of him and said, "You should be very clear that no tactical array can hurt me, no matter how strong it is." The wrinkles on the national master's face relaxed at the same time. He looked at Ning Kei and said expressionlessly, "You have mastered the Great Spirit and your body is as hard as gold and stone." But this does not mean that you are really invulnerable. After saying this, his figure suddenly appeared more than 10 feet away and stood on another carriage. The wind on the grassland blew on his coarse clothes, and the ordinary wooden bead chain swayed gently. He looked at Ning Kei and said calmly, "The academy is indeed extraordinary. I thought I had valued you enough, but I did not expect that I still underestimated you. I thought that you would at most be at the peak of knowing destiny state after leaving Chang'an. I did not expect that you could defeat Ada so easily, but I still want to try to trap you. If I can trap you, I will have the chance to kill you." The national master did not say this, but Ning Kei understood what he meant. He looked at him and thought of the 2 times that the national master showed ghost-like movements. He slightly raised his eyebrows. He had a weird feeling, because it did not make sense. Even the most powerful cultivators, such as the Abbey Dean and the eldest brother, who were in the distanceless state, could not come and go as fast as lightning in such a small area. He looked around and looked at the carriages scattered in the field. He felt the primitive and barbaric smell of blood and the gradually materialized array intent. He roughly grasped something. This was the preparation of the national master of the Golden Tribe. He used himself as bait to lure the enemy into the array. His original position was the array eye, but he had the ability to leave and trap the enemy. It was a simple method, but it was very difficult to realize, because he had to be able to get rid of the enemy, especially when the enemy was a cultivator at the level of Yulian or Ning Quebec. The ability to get rid of the enemy was even vaguely connected with the distanceless state to a certain extent. The national master stood on the carriage in the distance with his eyes closed. He put his palms together and kept chanting something silently. It was neither the Buddhist scriptures nor the Taoist canon. Listening to the weird sounds, it was more like the witchcraft prayers commonly used by the grassland priests. The chi of heaven and earth on the grassland changed dramatically. Countless gusts of wind blew from all directions and stopped outside the caravan. They began to roll up continuously, sucking the air in the caravan and throwing it into the sky. In an instant, the air around Ning Ke became extremely thin, and the warm and pleasant feeling brought by the morning breeze and morning light disappeared. In the next moment, Ning Ke smelled a strong smell of blood. The air around him suddenly became extremely cold. The smell of blood and coldness even invaded his body and reached the depths of his sense of perception, snow mountain and ocean of chi. His psyche power was a little stagnant, and the spinning speed of the crystal-clear water droplets condensed from the Great Spirit in his lower abdomen was forced to slow down. What was even more shocking was that the snow mountain was covered with an extremely thick layer of new snow. The dark clouds came to the sky above the grassland again, covering the warm sun. Ning Ke slightly lowered his head and did not sit down. He silently resisted the powerful array intent and thought about how to break it. He did not try to walk out, because there was no path in front of him. In the cold big array, the surface of his body was quickly covered with a layer of frost. His eyebrows were covered with 2 streaks of white snow, which looked a little funny and a little scary. He did not think of a way to break the array, because he could not determine where the National Master was in the array. The National Master was indeed the strongest person in the grassland. His state was unfathomable. He was obviously not a master of array, but he had used a very strange method in the Central Plains cultivation world to build such a big array with carriages in the wilderness and trap him. The National Master finished the scripture or incantation that no one could understand. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at Ning Ke calmly. He said, "There are boxes in the carriages. There are bones in the boxes. They are all the bones of the Tangs. Chanyu collected them for me for several years. Maybe some of them belong to the garrison of the city of Wei." Ning Ke raised his head and stared at him. His eyes were as sharp as a knife. The National Master did not seem to notice the hidden meaning in his eyes. He continued, "I know you used to live in the city of Wei. You must have an old relationship with some of the bones in the box. Unfortunately, they are already dead. The remaining souls are only resentment and no old relationship with you. They still want to be a part of my power to kill you." This was the foundation of the blood sacrifice array. The National Master was well versed in 3 ways. He had a high state and profound knowledge. He gathered the power of faith with Buddhism, collected souls with witchcraft, and used Taoism to build this big array with the power of heaven and earth. For this, he did not hesitate to sacrifice his lifespan, because only such a blood sacrifice formation would be able to accomplish his goal. The Great Spirit in Ning Ke's body had been gradually frozen. The smell of blood had even made his sense of perception a little shaken and uneasy. However, his mind was still clear. He stared at the National Master and said, "Why are you telling me this?" When he said this, the frost on his eyebrows had already grown to about a foot. "Because what you said before it died was very reasonable." The National Master looked at him and said with pity, "People can live muddle-headed, but they should die with a clear mind." "Very good," Ning Ke said. The National Master asked, "What's very good?" Ning Ke looked at him and said, "I have already planned to exterminate the Golden Tribe Royal Court. No matter who comes to persuade me, I will not change my mind. I don't need anything to help me to make up my mind. But what you have done can give me more powerful excuses when eldest brother questions me in the future." The National Master understood what he meant. After a moment of silence, he said, "Everything is an excuse." Ning Ke looked at the horse carriage under his feet. He looked at the slightly damaged box on the carriage. He looked at the faintly visible white bones in the box. Finally, he slowly took a step forward. "So tired. My neck. I haven't had it for a long time. I want to resume swimming." Chapter 1095. Ninkei's steps were firm. Unfortunately, he still couldn't get closer to the national master. However, he was not disappointed. An attempt was just an attempt. He believed that he would eventually find a way to find the other party in this formation of carriages, and then kill him. The national master was silent. The rosary beads between his thumb and index finger started to move by itself, releasing its own aura. The bloody smell in the carriage array suddenly became many times stronger. The smell of blood came from the dead in this field, from the Tang army that had no place to be buried. Ninkei looked up at him and asked, "You believe in everlasting heaven, but you have done such an evil thing. Don't you worry that you will be punished by the divine kingdom in the future?" The national master said, "The right thing is the right thing. The means are not important." Ninkei said, "You know the relationship between me and the everlasting heaven that you believe in." The national master looked at him and said seriously, "That's the relationship that you a mortal think." Ninkei said, "I will prove to you that the relationship does exist objectively." As he spoke, he had already taken 3 steps towards the carriage. With every step, the frost on his body would fall off. Originally, the frost was one with his body, unable to fall off. However, at this moment it fell off, because there were flames that were currently spewing out from his body. His footsteps landed on the grassland, leaving behind footprints as well as several clumps of raging flames. The flames were extremely clear, sacred and solemn. They were as white as the snow lotus blooming on the snow-capped peak of Tianqi Mountain. Although he still couldn't get close to the national master, now, there were several snow lotuses condensed by Haotian's divine light burning in the bloody array, scattering clear light. Those resentful souls that came from the carriages touched the Haotian's divine light. They did not make any painful howls, but were purified into nothingness with a light sizzle. Ninkei's body was gradually surrounded by Haotian's divine light. Countless resentful souls in the blood-sacrificing array of the national master could no longer get close to his body. Strangely, the snow on his eyebrows did not melt even though his body was burning. Before those resentful souls were purified, there would be a brief moment when they were alive. Ninkei did not close his eyes, because there were many things that could not be ignored with his eyes closed. He quietly looked at the faces that appeared, and then disappeared, and saw several familiar faces. "Go. If you want to go to Haotian's divine kingdom, I will let her take care of you. If the divine kingdom is destroyed one day, Master will be there to take care of you. If you want to go to the abyss of the netherworld to continue fighting, then please wait for me to meet you again." At that time, we will go and chop firewood. He looked at the countless familiar and unfamiliar faces in the divine light, and thought to himself. The imperial advisor's expression was still indifferent, but there was a flicker in the depths of his eyes. He probably did not expect Ninkei to have so much Haotian divine flame. Logically speaking, only the most devout Haotian Taoism believers could learn the West Hill divine skill and summon Haotian divine flame. The national master was not troubled by this problem for too long, because his state and knowledge were extraordinary. Since he knew about the entanglement between Ninkei and the everlasting heaven, he did not need to find the real answer for many things. The first thing he needed to do now was to suppress Ninkei's counterattack. Yes, Ninkei was burning himself at this time. That was the counterattack against the blood sacrifice array. As Haotian divine flame burned, and as he walked casually in the array of carriages, the whole grassland was illuminated. The cold wind that constantly swirled around the array of carriages had long been broken and dissipated. The temperature rose sharply, and there was no longer any chill. Ninkei reached out to wipe the water dripping from between his eyebrows, and finally walked in front of a carriage. The imperial advisor was no longer in the carriage. The broken box on the carriage revealed a gap, and the white human bones inside were burning in the blazing Haotian divine flame. They gradually turned yellow and scorched, but it was unimaginable that they were still holding on. Ninkei pulled out the padao from behind him. Without a word, he directly chopped at the carriage. The carriage collapsed directly, and the box fell heavily on the ground. The outside of the box immediately fell apart, turning into dozens of wooden strips, revealing the things inside. Inside the wooden box was an iron box made of iron bars. Inside the box were human bones, human skulls. It was unknown how many human skulls were needed to collect the whole box. Ninkei's expression did not change, and he chopped at the iron box again. With a loud bang, the iron box broke through the slightly hard ground, splashing mud and dust everywhere. It desperately drilled into the grassland, and only stopped when it was several feet deep. The iron box still did not break, and countless skulls were still trapped inside, continuously providing power for the blood sacrifice array, and supporting the Imperial Advisor's plan. Ninkei looked at the box underground, and remained silent. This is the array base that all the priests of the palace refined with the grand witchcraft, and collected the soul flame for thousands of years. Even if you have the power of the top of the human world, you can't break it, because human strength is limited, but the soul is unlimited. The Imperial Advisor appeared on a carriage in the south. His clothes were fluttering, and his prayer beads were spinning. He looked at Ninkei and said with pity, "Since it's futile, why do you insist?" Ninkei said, "All right. I have to admit that you trapped me. What next? If you can't kill me, then what's the difference between this blood sacrifice array and a child's play?" He turned to the Imperial Advisor on the carriage and said, "You should know very well that if you trap me to death, then I'll trap you to death. As long as you stay here, you will definitely die." He was right. For the Academy, the only person that the Golden Palace needed to seriously deal with was the unfathomable Imperial Advisor. If he could not leave because he wanted to trap Ninkei, then when the main force of the Tang army arrived, Su Qi appeared, or even that person himself, the Imperial Advisor would definitely lose. Strangely, the Imperial Advisor still looked calm, and was not affected by Ninkei's words. It seemed that he had absolute confidence that the Academy would not do anything to him. Perhaps it was because he thought that he could kill Ning Quebec. More than a dozen high priests appeared from all over the grassland, and then walked to the front of the array. Ninkei's gaze passed through the burning Haotian divine flame, and fell on these people, and on the human bones necklaces in front of their chests. He said finally, "The Golden Palace had always used these high priests who were good at witchcraft to fight against the cultivators of the Central Plains. Every high priest had the same level as the cultivators of the Central Plains, in the lower knowing destiny state. What would happen when more than a dozen high priests joined the blood sacrifice array? Those old high priests, with trembling lips, began to recite the strange scripture that the nation preceptor had recited before. Then they began to dance and twist their bodies, performing a dance that no one could understand. The grassland priests were good at witchcraft. The scripture was a spell, and the dance was also a spell. More than a dozen carriages collapsed, and the wooden strips wrapped around the boxes on the carriages cracked, revealing the iron bars inside. The iron boxes slowly floated into the air, and the last one to float was the iron box that Ninkei had cut deep into the ground. It fell down along with the soil, as if it was an unearthed monster. All the iron boxes were filled with human bones. They were all human skulls, and the remnants of the souls of the deceased were absorbed by the Imperial Advisor and high priests with the secret witchcraft of the grassland, and scattered in all directions. It was an unimaginably huge pressure, which came from the soul, and was applied on top of it. It was invisible and intangible, but it was real like a giant mountain, directly bombarding Ninkei's spiritual world. Ninkei groaned, and blood spilled from the corner of his mouth, but his eyes were still clear. Since he had merged with Sang Sang in the Buddha's chessboard, his body, soul, and psyche power had already reached the peak of the human world. The pressure from countless souls might be able to crush the sense of perception of a powerhouse at the peak of the knowing destiny state, but it could only hurt him. He could still hold on, but being trapped by the blood sacrifice array, it was not a good idea to hold on like this. He did not know how long he could hold on. What he needed to do now was to break the array and kill the enemy. Breaking the array and killing the enemy were two sides of the same coin. In order to break this terrifying blood sacrifice array, the key was to kill the Imperial Preceptor. In order to kill the Imperial Preceptor, He must first find his position and determine where he was. However, the problem now was that he didn't know where the Imperial Preceptor was. The National Preceptor was clearly here, right in front of his eyes, on the only remaining horse carriage, yet he seemed to be in a faraway place. He seemed to have merged with the blood sacrifice array, yet he seemed to be looking at this place from somewhere else. Why did he have such a feeling? Previously, when he jumped from the sky, he did not step on the head of the China Master. Later, the Imperial Advisor came and went freely. Maybe there was something hidden in it. Ning Ke looked at the Imperial Advisor standing in the horse carriage. He looked at his clothes and wooden beads fluttering in the morning wind. He squinted his eyes, and the strange feeling became clearer. Suddenly, he sensed something and looked up at the sky. He saw that in the dark clouds that were disturbed by the blood sacrifice formation, an extremely thin line suddenly appeared. There seemed to be countless resentful souls in the dark clouds. They were the people who died on the grassland. They were the sins of the Golden Tribe Royal Court over the years. But they were also the collective killing intent of the Golden Tribe Royal Court towards their enemies. Looking at the dark clouds, Ning Ke could clearly feel the terrifying murderous intent of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. He also had a deeper understanding of the array intent of the blood sacrificing array. He was sure that it was not something that he could break at the moment. However, his expression suddenly became relaxed. His eyebrows that were once again covered with snow were slightly raised. He seemed to be smiling. "You are indeed an amazing person." He looked back at the sky and looked at the Imperial Advisor not far away. He said calmly, "I admit that you have the ability to trap me, but it is not enough. Because you know that I have never been the only one in the academy." The Imperial Advisor slowly put his palms together like an old monk. His eyes were wide open like a barbaric wizard. He recited a hymn like a Taoist who had been meditating in the deep mountains for many years. He said, "Then when will they arrive?" Such a change in appearance and temperament was indeed extraordinary. However, Ning Ke had seen Master Lotus 32 changes in appearance many years ago at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. How could he be afraid? He said as if he was chatting with the Imperial Advisor. "Tang has something to do today. Then it is the headmaster who will come today." The Imperial Advisor's expression did not change. He said calmly, "In fact, she is the one I have been waiting for all these years. I really hope that she will not be absent today." It was still a casual conversation, but during the conversation, both of them had strong confidence. Ning Ke's confidence was in the academy, himself and his senior sister. The Imperial Advisor's confidence was in the tribe. This blood sacrifice array was not the Imperial Advisor's array, but the array of the entire Golden Tribe Royal Court. It was a whole tribe, a tribe with millions of people, a tribe with thousands of years of heritage, and its own unique culture. This tribe had become an array today. Even if Yu Lian came, how could she break it? The Imperial Advisor was telling the truth. He had been waiting for Yu Lian for many years. He was waiting for Yu Lian to appear, and then kill her. At this moment Ning Ke said something. "Do you think that if you trap me in the array, I can't come to you and she can't?" Hearing this, the Imperial Advisor could no longer be as calm as before. He suddenly felt that it was not he who had been waiting for her all these years, but she who had been waiting for him. There was a barren desert in the northwest of the city of Wei. In the middle of the desert, there was a tiny oasis. The oasis would appear and disappear according to the weather. It appeared less and disappeared more often than not. Neither the Golden Tribe Royal Court, nor the border army of the Tang Empire knew of its existence. To the south of the oasis was Kaiping Market. At this moment, the Northern Battlefront Army, led by Situ Ilan, was engaged in a bloody battle with the remaining army of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. No one would come here. As for Chan Yu and thousands of Duor cavalry who escaped from the city of Wei, they went straight to the depths of the grassland. They went all the way north and could not pass by the oasis. Logically speaking, there should be no one here. But today, someone suddenly came to the oasis. A grassland cavalryman was leading a warhorse and resting by the only river in the oasis. The horse was an ordinary warhorse, and the cavalryman seemed to be an ordinary cavalryman, wearing clothes stained with blood. He looked to the east dozens of miles away, feeling the change of the chi of heaven and earth there, and smiled. Dozens of miles away to the east was the location of the blood sacrifice array, in the north of the city of Wei. The cavalryman lowered his head and washed his face. Then he held a handful of water to moisten his throat. The calm stream water reflected his face. It was a young and handsome face. The beard on his cheeks hadn't been trimmed for many days, growing messily like weeds. He looked extremely rough and forthright. Suddenly his movements became stiff. In the stream, his face was still calm, but there was a wildfire burning deep in his eyes. The clear water slowly leaked through the gaps between his fingers, just like the time that flowed away in his life. When the water completely flowed away, he raised his head and looked to the other side of the stream. A girl in a yellow dress appeared on the other side of the stream. The young girl looked to be around 12 or 13 years old. Her appearance was tender and beautiful, and her two black ponytails swayed lightly behind her. She looked extremely cute, but her expression was cold to the extreme. "I heard that you are waiting for me." The girl in the yellow dress looked at the grassland cavalryman and said, "Actually, I have always thought that Yu Lian is very handsome. It's a pity that she is not the protagonist. No matter if she is the protagonist or the heroine, I will try to write a similar character in my next book. Then tomorrow's update will be very late. If there is any uncertainty, I will ask my leader to report to you." Chapter 1096. The grassland cavalryman was a little surprised. He looked around to make sure there was no one else, and then asked, "Who are you?" He didn't answer the girl's question. Instead, he asked for her identity. It seemed very natural, like a real chance encounter. However, in such a remote and unknown green province, it was impossible for a lone grassland cavalryman and a young girl in a yellow dress to meet by chance. He just wanted to give it a try. Unfortunately, the girl did not want to talk too much with him. "You are Ninkia, and I am Yu Lian," said the girl. The grassland cavalryman was silent for a moment. He stood up and wiped the remaining water on his hands. He looked at the other side and said, "You are indeed the legendary 23-year cicada cultivation. You can see through me." In this world, few people knew that the real name of the national master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court was Ninkia. Just like few knew that the surname of the hierarch of the Divine Halls of West Hill was Xiong Chumo, and few knew about Yi Hongyu's childhood. But she knew. She knew everything. Because she was the Grand Master of the Devil's Doctrine, the mysterious 23-year cicada cultivation. Her name was Yu Lian, and her real name was Lin Wu. Her life was shrouded in fog for others and the entire human world, but she could see everything clearly. Yu Lian looked at him and said, "Your array is indeed interesting." A big array composed of the killing souls and countless resentful souls of the entire Golden Tribe Royal Court was only interesting in her eyes. Of course, it was not easy to get such a comment from her. What was more interesting was the National Master himself. The National Master was at the blood sacrificing array. But in front of Ning Ke, he was at the stream dozens of miles away in the west. In front of Yu Lian, he was no longer old and tired, but a spirited young cavalryman. What exactly happened? The imperial tutor was already dead. Or rather, the old imperial tutor was already dead. He sacrificed all his life for the blood sacrificing array. His body had decayed into dust, leaving only his spiritual consciousness and the so-called divine soul. Then he turned into this young grassland cavalryman in an unimaginable way. The strange feeling that Ning Ke felt in the array was because the National Master was not real. However, he could not find where the National Master's real body was. Fortunately, Yu Lian could find it. The Imperial Advisor had exhausted his lifespan to create that terrifying blood sacrifice formation. Who would have thought that Yu Lian did not even go there? Instead, she casually walked to the bank of the stream and arrived in front of his real body. The grassland cavalryman had a regretful look in his eyes. If you stared into his eyes, you could see the vicissitudes of life and the sense of calmness that could only be formed by age. Don't feel regretful. Yu Lian looked at him and said calmly, "No matter if you're reincarnating, hiding or possessing, how can you hide from my eyes?" Yes, this kind of method, which was beyond the scope of human beings, seemed extremely magical and incomprehensible. But who was Yu Lian? She was the 23-year cicada cultivation. She practiced the most incredible and magical method in the cultivation world. And she had experienced the most bizarre and unimaginable changes. The methods used by the imperial tutor were not qualified to be mentioned in front of her. Suddenly, there was the sound of cicadas by the stream. There were no cicadas in the wilderness. There had never been cicadas. But now there were cicadas chirping. It was not mournful, but rather peaceful. Because Yu Lian moved. She lifted her feet and stepped on the clear and peaceful surface of the stream, slowly walking toward them. The wind on the grassland blew her yellow dress, making her look like a little fairy walking on the waves. The imperial advisor looked at her bare feet and said, "I thought you would jump down from the sky, but I didn't expect that you would walk over the water." Yu Lian said calmly, "Just like everyone thought that you would guard the rear for the Golden Tribe Royal Court, and try your best to keep the people of the academy here. But I didn't expect that you wanted to escape long ago." The imperial advisor asked, "Can't the academy let me escape?" Yu Lian said, "No, because you are indeed very powerful." After a moment of silence, the imperial advisor said, "Thank you. I just wanted to trap you. I want to leave the last bloodline and kindling for the tribe. As for me, I am indeed going to travel around the world." Yu Lian said, "I said don't feel sorry. You can't fool my eyes." A moment ago, Ning Ke said the same thing over there. The imperial advisor looked toward the direction of the blood-sacrificing array in the east. He had some secret connection with that place. He sighed and said, "My regret is not that I failed to hide it from you. I never expected to do so. I only regret that you didn't enter my array." Yu Lian said, "Do you think your array can trap me?" The imperial advisor turned to her and said, "My array can kill you." Yu Lian said, "Xiong Chimo thought so too. I'm different from him." The imperial advisor said calmly, "I'm stricter than him. And when we were at the back of the mountain of the academy, he didn't know who you were. But I always knew. I've been waiting for you." Yu Lian said, "So what?" The imperial advisor held the hilt and looked at her, who was walking slowly on the stream. He said, "I want to have a try." He looked like a rough grassland cavalryman, especially when he held the hilt tightly. A murderous aura that only the army could have shot up to the sky. In stark contrast to his aura, the cavalry uniform on his body began to tear apart. His beard fell without any wind, and even his hair fell down. Between the young monk's machete in her hands, countless streams of aura sputtered. The stream behind her began to ripple, then boiled, and then turned into steam. The entire stream dried up in the blink of an eye. The fish and weeds in the stream were nowhere to be found. The bottom of the stream also became extremely dry and cracked into countless tiny pieces, like the scales of a dead snake. Those cracks quickly spread to the fields behind the stream, instantly extending to a circle. The ground within a radius of dozens of miles became dry and cracked, like a giant turtle that had died of old age. Her yellow dress and her hair were gently swaying in the wind. Her dress was not burned, but her hair was slightly dry. Yu Lian quietly looked at the young monk behind the machete. The young monk quietly looked at her. There was admiration in his eyes, but no fear. He admired her. She was indeed the grandmaster of the devil's doctrine, a grand cultivator with unfathomable strength. She could withstand the collective will of the tribe carried by the blood-sacrificing array with only her hands. He was not afraid, because he knew very well that Yu Lian could only withstand the machete. It was impossible for her to fight back under such circumstances. He was not at a disadvantage. Yu Lian did not fight back, but her eyes showed a sneer. What was she sneering at? The young monk suddenly understood. His machete forced Yu Lian to stand still by the stream. Yu Lian's hands also fixed him where he was. He could not move. Could he, who was dozens of miles to the east, still move? When the machete hacked at Yu Lian dozens of miles to the west, Ning Ke felt it most clearly, because the soul power that was suppressing him suddenly loosened. The dozens of iron boxes floating in the air suddenly trembled violently. The resentment from the white skulls and the killing intent hidden in the array were drawn by some power and fled to the distance. Ninkei suddenly turned his head and looked at that place. It was in the west. He knew Third Sister was in the west. The thin line he saw in the cloud was the trace left by Senior Sister. He did not know what she was doing there, but now he had guessed the truth. At this time, he was besieged by dozens of grassland high priests. What could he do? If it were someone else, he might not be able to react in such a short time. But Ninkei was not someone else. The tacit understanding between him and Yu Lian was hard to imagine. He and Yu Lian rarely met these years, but the tacit understanding was always there. The tacit understanding started many years ago, from the cicadas by the old library, from the hairpin-style small regular script, from the waste token, from the devil, and from their similar temperament. He heard the cicadas dozens of miles to the west. He knew Senior Sister had taken action. He closed his eyes and then opened them. In the west, when the young monk slashed at Yu Lian with his blade. In the east, he hacked at the old national master on the horse carriage. I feel better and better. I'll write more tomorrow, and hack the national master to death. As for the chapter titles, the authors of our generation will definitely have a deep imprint of wuxia novels. No one will be able to get rid of it. I have to thank the predecessors who wrote such cool stories and phrases. The pleasure of reading them is still unforgettable. Chapter 1097. He did not hold back this time. All the great spirit in his body turned into Haotian's divine light, and gushed out along with the momentum of the blade. What was more terrifying was that there was also a killing soul in the blade. That was the killing soul of the border army of the Tang Empire. He started cultivating it at Shibi Lake, and it was only perfected after the massacre in the city of Wei. The dark blade fell on the head of the national master this time. This time, the national master could no longer move his body like a ghost. Because his body was fixed by Yu Lian at the stream, the national master put his palms together and clamped Ninkei's blade. Ninkei lowered his head and continued to move forward in silence. The national master's face suddenly turned extremely pale. The wooden prayer beads hanging around his neck broke, one by one at a speed visible to the naked eye. They turned into wood dregs and were blown away by the wind. This blood-sacrificing array was indeed marvelous. The array would be wherever the national master was. Even though they were dozens of miles apart, the arrays were still connected. Therefore, his whereabouts were hard to track as they reflected each other. But now, Yu Lian caught his blade in the west, and Ninkei slashed him in the east. The senior sister and junior brother from the academy used the simplest method to break his trap. Both sides were breaking the array. Which side should the national master defend? Defend both sides? Even if he had the killing soul of the entire Golden Tribe royal court, how could he defeat the attack from two powerful people like Yu Lian and Ninkei? As the wooden prayer beads broke faster and faster, the national master's face became paler and paler. He felt that the power in Ninkei's iron blade was endless, and he did not know how long he could hold on. The young monk's face also became more and more pale by the dried-up stream in the west. He felt that the power coming from the blade was endless, and he did not know how long Yu Lian could hold on. The young monk screamed in anger and pain. The machete in his hand trembled violently. Almost at the same time, dozens of miles away in the east, the old national master on the horse carriage also screamed unwillingly. The wooden prayer beads hanging suddenly broke, and a terrifying aura shrouded the entire carriage array. The dozen or so high priests around the formation suddenly turned into a dozen or so blossoms of blood. Without any warning, a dozen or so high-level high priests died just like that. Moreover, he had died such a miserable death. The blood was like a fountain, spraying toward the array of carriages from all directions. Ninkei did not know what was hidden in the blood, but he felt a little uneasy. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. A bloody rainstorm fell from the sky. All the blood of the 13 high priests was sucked out by the blood-sacrificing formation and finally sprinkled on the iron boxes in the air. Some of the blood seeped into the white skulls, and some fell on the ground, wetting the weeds and making them look like bloody dew. Ning Ke let out a muffled groan, and the crystal water droplet in his body suddenly burst open. Vast amounts of great spirit poured into his limbs, and then turned into Haotian's divine light, spreading out through countless pores. In an instant his body began to burn, turning him into a flaming man. The blood rain that fell from the sky made sizzling sounds after falling into the flames. There were also faint ear-piercing screams and cries of pain, and there was even a faint burnt smell. Not a single drop of the high priest's blood fell on Ning Quebec. But he could not relax, because the national master in front of the blade suddenly became much stronger. The wrinkles on his face were flattening at a speed visible to the naked eye, and he looked 10 years younger in an instant. Could this be the strongest move of the blood-sacrificing formation? Ning Ke did not know that by the stream dozens of miles away in the west, the young monk had suddenly disappeared. The machete was deeply inserted into the dry and cracked ground. The national master used the lives of more than 10 high priests to do one thing, and that was to reunite the blood-sacrificing formation. In other words, the young monk had instantly returned to the field. This was the reason why Ning Ke saw that the national master had become younger quickly. Ning Ke did not know the reason, but he knew that he had to temporarily avoid it. The iron cutlass turned in the air and avoided the young national master's strong will. Without hesitation, he dragged the cutlass and drew something in the blood rain with his trembling right hand. The national master chose to return to the east instead of letting the old national master's soul return to the young monk's body. The reason was simple. In his eyes, Ning Ke was still not as scary as Yu Lian. He subconsciously wanted to avoid Yu Lian. The east and west were dozens of miles away, and he used the formation to return as fast as lightning. He believed that he would have enough time to kill Ning Ke before Yu Lian arrived, and then he could focus on dealing with Yu Lian. The young national master left the horse carriage, and with the flow of the qi of heaven and earth, he flew towards Ning Quebec. The lightness, the freedom. He was indeed a powerhouse from the grassland. His familiarity with the heaven and earth was far beyond the cultivators from the central plains, and Ning Ke could not compare. Ning Ke held the cutlass horizontally and flew backwards, but his speed was not as fast as the national master. But he was not afraid. He stared at the national master's eyes silently, and his wrist turned again. There was a soft sound. The young national master's face turned pale again, and there was a clear blood mark between his fingers. That was the talisman of two that Ning Ke wrote under the cover of the divine light. If the national master did not have the entire blood-sacrificing formation, his entire arm would have been broken. The national master was expressionless, and he flew forward again. Dozens of miles. The stream was only dozens of miles away, and Yu Lian would arrive in a moment. He had to be faster. However, it was a pity that he still underestimated Yu Lian's speed. In the sky full of dark clouds, a shrill howl suddenly sounded. A clear thin line cut through the entire layer of clouds, drawing from the west to the east, and ending at the battlefield full of flames. There was a loud bang. Yu Lian jumped down from the sky. This time, she did not walk over from the water, but really jumped down from the gray sky. The national master could not avoid it like how he dealt with Ning Ke previously, and could only take it head-on. It was as if a hammer had smashed on a giant bell. The entire grassland seemed to have heard the loud bang. In the broken carriage, between the iron boxes that were suspended in the air, there were strong qi flying everywhere, and there was blood everywhere. After a long time, the blood fog gradually disappeared, and the bell gradually quieted down. There were a few deep wrinkles at the corner of the national master's eyes. Under his feet was the cracked ground. Behind him was the iron box that contained the white bones. And in front of him was Ning Ke, who was covered in divine light, and Yu Lian, who had her hands behind her back. There was silence, or perhaps she was adjusting her breath and resting. I've lost. The national master looked at the academy's senior brother and junior sister, and smiled with some difficulty. He said, "Actually, I've lost the moment you saw through me. I never thought that I could defeat both of you at the same time. Yu Lian was expressionless and she did not speak. Ning Ke was very calm. He said, "Then why don't you kill yourself? What are you doing?" "But it's still very difficult for you to kill me." The Imperial Preceptor squinted his eyes and looked at the 10 metal boxes floating in the air. He looked at the white human skulls in the boxes and said slowly, "I have already merged with this formation. If you can't break this formation, you won't be able to hurt my foundation. And the power of the human world can't break this formation." Ning Ke said, "There is no array in the world that can't be broken. Even if this array contains the killing power of the Golden Tribe for hundreds of years, when I mobilize more than 100,000 Tang soldiers, I can easily break it by spitting. But that needs time." The National Master looked at him quietly and said, Yu Lian suddenly said, "I never like things that are too troublesome." Her yellow dress floated in the air, and she reached out to hit one of the iron boxes. Previously, when she jumped down from the sky, the Grand Tutor was covered in blood. At the same time, a crack appeared on the corner of the metal box. Now, as her petite palm landed, there was another terrifying sound that reverberated in the grassland. Boom! She slapped again. Boom! The National Master's face became extremely pale. He sat cross-legged on the last horse carriage and struggled to maintain the array. But Ning Ke did nothing. He put the iron cutlass back into the sheath and walked under Yu Lian. He quietly watched what she was doing, as if he was enjoying a good show. Yu Lian slapped for the third time, and the crack on the iron box finally widened. The iron box that Ning Ke could not cut open with his iron cutlass with all his strength, and the iron box that was made of secret iron refined by the fire of the soul for a long time, was cracked by her small hand. The National Master looked at Yu Lian and frowned. He said, "Do you really think that you can break my array with your physical strength? 23 years cicada cultivation, you think too highly of yourself." As expected, as he finished his words, the smell of blood came out from the depths of the white bones in the iron box, and then the crack on the iron box became smaller at a speed visible to the naked eye. Yu Lian frowned, and seemed to be a little displeased. Ning Ke looked up at her without saying anything. The wind on the grassland blew the hem of her dress. Yu Lian took a breath. The wind around the carriage formation was so strong that the yellow skirt was fluttering and looked like a flag. She took a deep breath, causing her slightly curvy chest to heave up and down. Previously in the city of Wei, Ada's deep breath had sucked in half the air and the qi of heaven and earth in the street into his body. Yu Lian seemed to be sucking in all the qi of heaven and earth in the whole grassland into her body. She raised her small white hand again. Her hand fell on the iron box again. There was a loud buzzing sound. The broken pieces of the carriage were blown in all directions by the violent hurricane. Ning Ke groaned and resisted the power by force. Blood flowed out from the ears of the National Master. The violent sound wave spread far and wide, even hundreds of miles away. In front of Kaiping Market, the cavalries of both sides who were fighting desperately suddenly stopped waving their weapons and covered their ears with their pale faces in pain. The war horses were even more pitiful and fell to the ground in pain. Yu Lian's small face was also a little pale, but her expression was still like ice, transparent and indifferent. She reached out and patted the iron box again. With a cracking sound, the iron box was broken. The yellow skirt kept flashing above the wilderness. She hit more than 10 times, and the horrible sound wave spread around, and the iron boxes were broken. Countless white skulls fell to the ground with a rustle. A pure Haotian divine flame gushed out from Ning Ke's palm, and instantly burned those skulls to ashes. Those resentful souls that were imprisoned by the National Master, and the high priests finally got a real release. The blood sacrifice array was broken. The National Master was covered with blood, and his pale and old face was full of blood and sweat. He looked at Yu Lian, and his eyes were full of confusion. He did not understand how she could break the blood sacrifice array that he had prepared for years with only her strength. I don't think too highly of myself. Yu Lian returned to the ground and walked to him with her hands behind her back. She looked down at him and said, "You are standing too low, and the power of the human world cannot break the array. You don't even know what is power." The wind on the grassland gently blew the yellow skirt. She was so small and thin but so tall and big. She was a little girl, but also a great guru. The national master used the power of the whole clan to make the blood sacrifice array, and he even used the secret method of witchcraft to incarnate. But all of these were meaningless in front of her. No matter how magical witchcraft, Buddhist Dharma or Taoist canon was, it was no match for her power. She was the grandmaster of the devil's doctrine, famous for her mystery. She had disappeared in the cultivation world for 23 years, and no one knew that she had been practicing hairpin-style small regular script by the east window of the old library of the academy. That was because the headmaster wanted her to calm down. She calmed her mind and stopped thinking about other things. Conspiracies and Dharma access were no longer important. She cultivated herself to be extremely pure. Purity was in the mind, and purity was in the power. She returned to the origin of the cultivation of the devil's doctrine, and returned to the most correct path. So she became the most powerful person in the devil's doctrine for thousands of years. She was not immortal, but she could move mountains. She could even move a mountain, not to mention a few iron boxes. Salute to the bean. I don't think I have failed. The national master looked at the blood flowing like a waterfall on his body, and his old face suddenly showed the last bit of confidence. He looked at Yu Lian and Ning Ke and said, "At least I saved the last bloodline of the Golden Tribe." According to the time, this terrifying battle between the powerhouses in the north of the city of Wei had lasted for half a day. Chan Yu and the Duoer cavalry might have run more than 100 miles away. It doesn't matter how far they run. Is it meaningful? Ning Ke looked at him and said, "You know very well that they will all die." At this moment, snow suddenly fell from the sky. Although the wilderness was much colder than the central plains, and there were times when it suddenly snowed at the end of spring, it was still warm around the city of Wei yesterday. Why did it suddenly snow now? Ning Ke looked up and found that it was the dark clouds that were summoned by the blood sacrifice array. Because they had blocked the sunlight for too long, the clouds below started to frost, and now it finally fell. The snow became heavier and heavier, and gradually became a blizzard. During the blizzard, it was the most difficult to track, unless it was a real powerhouse. The national master thought that this was an opportunity for the Golden Tribe royal court, because he had already guessed that Tang should be leading the desolate men to resist the counterattack of the divine halls of West Hills cavalry in the eastern wilderness. Only Yu Lian from the academy came, and she should not be fighting again. "Look, it's snowing." He looked at the snowy sky and said with a smile, "This is the salt that Tungri sprinkled on the human world. It will protect his most devout followers and guide them out of the valley." Yu Lian looked up at the sky and slightly squinted her eyes. She said, "That girl always liked to add too much salt when she was cooking in the back of the mountain. Now that I think about it, it's really annoying." The national master was slightly stunned, and then he understood what she was talking about. He could not help but sigh bitterly. As a devout follower of Haotian, it was really painful to talk to those who had lived with Haotian for a long time in the back of the mountain of the academy. Ada in the city of Wei was like that, and now his relatives were like that. The blizzard came very suddenly. In just a moment, the wilderness was covered with a thick layer of snow. The snow was so dazzling that it was hard to see the scenery in the distance. Suddenly, a soul-stirring roar came from the depths of the blizzard. It should be the roar of some kind of beast, but the sound was too loud. It seemed that the beast must be extremely huge to have a resonating cavity that could transmit the sound in all directions. The national master looked into the blizzard and faintly saw many black shadows approaching slowly. Those black shadows were very tall, and each of them was like a small mountain. As the national master of the Golden Tribe, he could naturally guess what was coming. His expression suddenly changed. Logically speaking, it was impossible for such a powerful beast to come to such a place in the south. The earth trembled slightly, and the snow was shaken until it became soft. Those hill-like black shadows slowly walked into the blizzard and came to the front of the three of them. It was a pack of snow wolves that appeared in the north of the city of Wei. A pack of snowfield direwolves. Hundreds of snowfield direwolves the size of small hills stood silently in the wasteland, like a snowy river. Compared to the time when they were forced to go to the south, the current snowfield direwolves were obviously different. They were no longer thin and tired. Their once protruding shoulder blades were now covered by strong muscles and snow-white fur. It was all thanks to the guidance of the eldest brother that they could obtain a stable source of food in the wilderness that was close to the human settlements in the south. The national master was a little confused. He did not understand why these terrifying and powerful creatures would appear here. The female wolf in the front had smooth and soft snow-white fur. Her expression was gentle like a beautiful snowy mountain. On the back of the female wolf, there was an ordinary skinny male wolf. In front of the female wolf, there was a relatively smaller snow wolf. Judging from their expressions, these three should be a family. Looking at this scene, the national master's expression became extremely interesting. Until today, he did not know that the leader of the snowfield direwolves in the northern taiga forest turned out to be an ordinary male wolf. What happened next made him even more shocked and speechless. He saw that ordinary male wolf straighten his body and saluted Yu Lian and Ning Ke with hands folded in front like a human being. And Yu Lian and Ning Ke also saluted back seriously. The national master remembered the black donkey and the tens of thousands of wild horses in the wilderness outside Guha a few days ago. He felt that the wind in the wilderness was getting colder. It had nothing to do with the falling snow or the blood loss. It was only related to these scenes. Did all of them belong to the academy? He suddenly felt that Chongqing was really unfair. Or maybe Chongqing really could not do anything to the academy. Ning Ke whistled. The young snow wolf wagged its tail happily at him, but it did not run to him. Instead, it turned around with the big team of snow wolves and headed to the back of the blizzard. Since they were part of the academy, they naturally had to do something for the academy. Looking at the snow wolves disappearing in the blizzard, Ning Ke turned to the national master and said, "The golden tent will no longer exist after today." Chapter 1098. The national master lay in a pool of blood with a complicated expression. He was confused, desperate, and relieved. He could not change the fate of his own tribe, so he was no longer responsible. Perhaps immortality has truly abandoned us a long time ago. If Chanyu did not die, how could he have made such a mistake? The golden tribe has lost, but do you really want to kill us? He looked at Yu Lian and said tiredly, "Ning Ke and we have the city of Wei between us. What about you? The hatred between the tribe and the desolate man was 1,000 years ago." Yu Lian did not say anything. The national master panted and said, "Don't forget that you desolate man used to enslave us for countless years. I don't think we owe you anything. You have no reason to do this. We want this grassland. We can give it to you. You can't afford it. We want it. The wolves want it. Youngest uncle's donkey and his horse want it. And the millions of slaves that Junemo will bring out from the underground. There are too many people who want it." Yu Lian put her hands behind her back and looked at the grassland in the wind and snow. She thought of the desolate man's thousands of years of wandering. She said slowly without any extra emotion on her face, "What about us?" The national master was agitated and said angrily, "The Abbey Dean wants Haoyan Taoism to perish, but do we not have the right to live? Do we have to die?" Yu Lian looked back at him, as if she was puzzled by his question. She raised her eyebrows and said, "Of course you have the right to live. Everyone is born equal. As long as you come to this world, you have the right to live. Since that is the case, of course the strongest will live. You grew up in the wilderness. How can you not understand this? Have you ever seen a tiger or a wolf reasoning with a rabbit? If you don't want to be a rabbit, then learn to eat meat." This logic was very simple, very unreasonable, and very cold. The national master was silent for a long time and then murmured, But we don't have to kill all of us, right? Just like 1,000 years ago, our tribe can continue to be the desolate man's slaves. He looked at Yu Lian with pleading eyes. Yu Lian looked at Ning Quebec. Ning Ke did not say anything, and just looked into the wind and snow. Our teacher taught us that slavery is a very wrong thing. It is wrong to enslave anyone, including aliens. So the desolate man will not keep you as slaves. Yu Lian said. Then, I'll have to kill all of you. The nation master's last hope was shattered. He shook his head with a bitter smile and said, if the headmaster knew that his student had twisted his words like this, would he die of anger? Yu Lian looked up at the sky and remained silent for a long time. Then she said expressionlessly, he's already dead. If what we do can make him return to the human world out of anger, then we can do anything. Ning Ke also looked up at the sky. There were falling snow and dark clouds, but there was no moon. However, he still looked up at the sky with his senior sister. Then he remembered that he seemed to have said something similar. The disciples of the academy really hated their irresponsible teacher. Hate was not accurate. It should be said that they were annoyed, not annoyed but annoyed. Ning Ke and Yu Lian were the most annoyed. All these years, Jun and Mo had been fighting against the Buddhism sect in the Western wilderness. An eldest brother had not been involved in the affairs of the academy. In fact, Yu Lian and Ning Ke had been handling the affairs of the academy. This was definitely not what the enemies of the academy wanted to see. The spring breeze blew, and the smell of blood gradually dissipated. The stream dozens of miles away in the west had already dried up, and the little oasis had also disappeared with the wind. No one knew where it had gone. The blood-sacrificing array had become a ruin, made of the broken walls of the carriage. Countless ghastly human bones had been purified by Hao Yan's divine flame. The nation master finally closed his eyes. Yu Yan looked at Ning Ke and said, I'm going to recuperate. The rest is up to you. In the previous battle, she had fought against the killing souls of the entire Golden Tribe royal court alone. Although she had Ning Ke's help, she still suffered an unimaginable impact. Even if she won, she had paid a great price. Ning Ke thought of the most troublesome part of the plan and said, I'll wait for you at Peach Mountain. Yu Lian turned around and walked into the depths of the grassland. Suddenly, she thought of something and stopped. She asked, when I was floating in the air, did you keep looking up at my skirt? Ning Ke answered with a smile, Senior sister, you did a good job. Yu Lian did not bother to answer him. She shook her body and disappeared into the depths of the grassland. Ning Ke shook his head and put his iron cutlass back into the sheath. Hearing the dense hoofbeats behind him, he turned around and saw the smoke and dust around the city of Wei. Su Qi led the cavalrymen of the Northern Battlefront Army to kill all the grassland cavalrymen who were left behind to intercept them. They had started to chase the fleeing Golden Tribe royal court. With hundreds of snowfield direwolves leading the cavalrymen of the Northern Battlefront Army, Ning Ke was not worried at all, even though Tang was pinned down in the eastern wilderness by Long Qing and the cavalrymen of the Divine Halls of West Hill. The Golden Tribe royal court was already at its end. The smoke and dust were flying in the wilderness to the north of the city of Wei. The hoofbeats were resounding. Thousands of cavalrymen of the Tang Empire chased deep into the grassland to bury Chanyu. Ning Ke watched the scene quietly until the wilderness became quiet again. Then he turned around and walked toward the city of Wei. The snow had stopped and the dark clouds were gradually dispersing. The spring sunshine on the grassland was very bright. The old yellow city actually had a fresh smell. Maybe it was because of the hundreds of weeds growing in the mud wall in front of the city gate. Those stubborn weeds were the biggest enemy of the rammed mud wall. It was strange that no matter what was mixed in the mud, no matter how hard it was hammered, those weeds could not be stopped from taking root and sprouting again. Ning Ke remembered clearly that when he was in the city of Wei, all the soldiers and civilians in the city would go around to remove weeds, under the leadership of General Ma, to prevent the city wall from being damaged. The city of Wei had been in the hands of the grassland barbarians these years. They did not care about the city wall being damaged. After a few years, those weeds came back to life, as if they were laughing at the futile work of the Tangs. The blood in the city had been gradually absorbed by the yellow sand. The grassland barbarians' corpses and collapsed buildings were everywhere. The Tang army in charge of logistics was cleaning the battlefield. No one noticed Ning Quebec. He walked through the old city and looked at the familiar streets and buildings. He thought of the familiar people and things. It was as if he could still smell the smell of wine and roasted chicken. He did not enter the tavern, nor did he enter General Ma's house. He did not enter any other place, because he knew that those places had long since been deserted. The small courtyard beside the stream in the remote part of the city was still there. It was his and Song Song's small courtyard. There was a hunting knife sticking out of the wall of the small courtyard. It was the one he did not take away. He looked at the hunting knife and was silent for a while. Then he pushed the door and walked into the room. Looking at the bedding left by the grassland barbarians, he frowned in disgust and threw all those things on the ground in the courtyard, ready to burn them later. He found the bamboo chair and moved it to the field. He lay down and closed his eyes. The bright sunlight stung his eyes through his eyelids. He felt a little sore, so he closed his eyes tighter and lay in silence until he was about to fall asleep. After a long time he woke up. He opened his eyes and looked at the familiar small courtyard where he had lived for many years. He stretched out his hand in the air as he had done in the past. Unfortunately, there was no teapot. Just like now, when he raised his face, there would not be a warm wet towel placed on it. If he said it was hot, there would not be a pair of cold, white feet in his arms. If he said he was hungry, there would not be a bowl of noodles with fried eggs. The city of Wei was still there. The tavern was still there. The small courtyard was still there. The brick bed was still there. The box on the opposite side of the brick bed was still there. The courtyard wall was still there. The hunting knife hidden in the wall was still there. The silver notes were still in his arms. But she was no longer here. Everyone was no longer here. She was no longer here. Ning Ke lay on the bamboo chair and looked at the blue sky. He was thinking about many things. Before he left the city of Wei, he told General Ma, "Don't grow old and don't die. Wait for me to show my filial piety." When he left the city of Wei, he told all the men in the city that if he could not make a name for himself, he would not come back. Now he had reached the top position in the world. He finally had the face to come back, but it was too late. The war between the Golden Tribe Royal Court and the Tang Empire was destined to change the situation of the world. But for him, this war was actually another thing. It had nothing to do with the world. It was only related to the city of Wei. He wanted to take back the city of Wei. He wanted to avenge the city of Wei. At the same time, he wanted to find someone in the city of Wei. Time passed slowly on the bamboo chair. Several days later, the sound of hooves came from the stream opposite the small courtyard. It gradually slowed down, followed by the sound of a password. Situ Elon nodded slightly and responded to the salute of the Tang army. She walked to the tent opposite the small courtyard and handed the horse to a soldier. Then she looked at the small courtyard and asked, "What did he say?" A general shook his head and said, "He insisted." After a moment of silence, Situ Elon asked, "How many captives?" The general said, "There are some small battles around the 7 stockade villages, but the situation is basically under control. If you include the slaves, women and children, there are at least more than 400,000 people." Situ Elon slightly raised her eyebrows and said, "Even so, he still insisted." The general did not say anything. It seemed that he did not have much opinion on the insistence of the people in the courtyard. Situ Elon looked at the small courtyard not far away. After a moment of silence, she walked over. "This is a massacre." She looked at Ning Ke on the bamboo chair and said. She was calm, but her voice was slightly trembling. Ning Ke opened his eyes and looked at her. He said, "You have been in the army for many years. Haven't you seen a massacre?" Situ Elon was silent for a long time and said, "According to the rule, as long as the woman is not dead, she will not die. Even the most barbaric tribe on the grassland will do the same. This is the courtyard where she and I lived many years ago. We have lived here for many years." Ning Ke stood up from the bamboo chair and pointed to the small courtyard. Then he motioned her to follow him out of the courtyard and walked to the street in the city. He began to introduce to her every brick, stone, grass and wood in the city of Wei. The people in this city are all people I know. They all died that year. The grassland people broke through the city gate and broke into the city. They held machetes and killed anyone they saw. At that time, did they distinguish between men and women and tall or short? Walking out of the city gate, he stood on the meadow and looked at the glaring weeds on the mud wall of the city of Wei. He shook his head and said, I don't want this kind of thing to strengthen my determination and convince you and other Tang generals. I just want to tell you where my determination comes from. No one can stop me from taking revenge. Situilan followed his eyes and looked at the city of Wei. Thinking of her comrades and clansmen who died in the frontier fortress these years, she struggled and said hesitantly, But the academy doesn't teach like this. As I said, no one can stop my revenge, even if the headmaster of academy comes back. Ning Ke looked at the bright moon that had just appeared in the depth of the sunset, and said after a long time of silence. Finally, he pointed to the dozens of weeds on the wall of the city of Wei and said, Maybe this is a serious sin, but I don't care. I only know that we must remove the roots when we cut the weeds. Otherwise, we will be in trouble. A few days later, the whole grassland was soaked with the blood of the grassland people. In this war, the Tang people who won firmly carried out Ning Ke's will just like they did outside Guha. They did not leave any captives and naturally did not leave any trouble. But the machetes of the Tang army became a little blunt. Ning Ke and Situilan came to the meadow outside the city of Wei again. The Tang army gathered in the wilderness, looked at the two figures on the meadow, with complicated emotions in their eyes. Those emotions were fanatical worship, but also cold awe. As a fierce army, the tens of thousands of cavalrymen outside the city of Wei had killed many people. They had also seen the horrible scene of the so-called massacre on the grassland. But they had never seen people kill like this. The whole grassland seemed to be watered by blood. There was a pungent smell of blood everywhere. The mosquitoes and flies smelled the smell and made a numbing buzzing sound. If not for the tactical array master, the Tang army would not be able to stay here. However, the tactical array could keep the mosquitoes and flies away and dilute the smell of blood, but it could not block the sight. Dozens of miles north of the city of Wei, on the flat wilderness, there was a hill. Because it was too far away, they could not see clearly. The hill was shining in the morning light. The Tang army all knew what that hill was. Every time they looked at the hill, they would feel a little cold. That was a hill piled up with the heads of the grassland people. Ning Ke stood on the meadow and looked at the hill of human heads in the distance. He looked very calm. There was no fear, and no abnormal fanaticism. For him, it was just something that he had to do. My nickname in the grassland was the woodchopper of Shibi Lake. He looked at the vast wilderness and said slowly, Both the horse gang and the cavalrymen of the palace were afraid of my cavalry team. Because I can really kill people. Situilan did not say anything. These days she was a little numb. Ning Ke continued, When I was in Chang'an, I told others that the world did not have many opportunities to see me kill people in the past. But there will be many opportunities in the future. Situilan looked at his profile and said, I hope there will never be such an opportunity in the future. Ning Ke thought for a while and said, I hope so too. But it depends on whether the world can cooperate. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.